Imagine waking up to find yesterday is tomorrow, and tomorrow is yesterday. Your memories are fluid, your future uncertain. This isn't a dream, it's a deep dive into the world of temporal paradoxes. For the next 3 hours, let your mind explore the intricate weaves of time, bending and folding reality until the very fabric of existence is questioned. You might just discover a profound new perspective. Let's start with first. Causality, reversal. Paradox. There are moments that seem impossible, and yet they arrive with the quiet weight of inevitability. A glass falls from a table, shattering against the floor, and only then do you hear the laugh that startled your hand, the cause following the effect, as if the universe had rewound its script. It is not déjà vu, not coincidence, but something stranger, a reversal in the very order of reality. You do not cause and then see the result. You see the result, and only afterward feel the cause fall into place. This is the causality reversal paradox. A rupture in logic. A wound in the fabric of time. It is when events trigger their own beginnings, when outcomes appear first, dragging their origins behind them like reluctant shadows. It should be impossible because every law we know rests on the chain of before and after. And yet, testimonies emerge. Whispers of people who have lived moments where effect pulls the strings of cause. A man once swore that he walked into a room and smelled smoke before the candle tipped over. Another claimed he felt the sting of grief seconds before receiving the phone call that delivered it. One woman said she heard the echo of her own scream before the accident that forced it from her lungs. In each story, the world slipped out of sequence, rewriting order as if time itself had been edited out of rhythm. Science resists such accounts. It calls them misfires of perception, errors in the brain's processing, false signals mistaken for prophecy. And yet, entire experiments in quantum physics hint at the same madness. Photons that seem to decide their state only after being measured, particles whose behavior appears to retroactively alter their own past. At the smallest scales, the universe does not care about before and after. It only cares about entanglement, about relationships that twist across time like threads. Imagine if that logic escaped the laboratory, spilling into our lived reality. Imagine if your choices were not seeds planted in the soil of the future, but fruits that ripened first and dropped backward, seeding themselves into the past. In such a world, you do not live forward. You live within a loop, where every decision is already the echo of its outcome. Some believe the paradox is not a mistake, but a glimpse of the hidden truth, that time is not a line, but a knot. Every action and reaction are tangled together, indistinguishable, feeding each other in endless recursion. In this view, cause and effect are illusions. They are simply the way our minds narrate what is otherwise a vast, simultaneous web. Others whisper that the causality reversal paradox is a test, that when you experience it, you are brushing against the architecture of the simulation itself. The system cannot always maintain the illusion of sequence, and so it slips, showing you the gears beneath the story. A laugh after the shatter, a grief before the news, a scream before the wound. It is not prophecy, not madness. It is the truth breaking through. There is no first, no second, no order at all. Consider the horror of realizing that your future self may already be orchestrating your present, that the choices you think you are making now are not truly yours, but the inevitable results of what is yet to come. When the arrow of time bends backward, you are no longer the author of your life. You are its echo. And yet, there is a strange comfort too. If effects can birth their causes, then perhaps endings are never truly endings. Perhaps every loss is also its own beginning, each grief folding backward into the love that created it. Perhaps death itself is only the effect that plants the seed of life in some other frame of being, but the terror always lingers. What if you are caught in such a loop already, and every choice you thought you made was only the shadow of something decided long after? How would you know? How could you escape? The causality reversal paradox reminds us that our deepest assumptions are fragile. The universe may not move from past to future, but from inevitability to origin. And when you find yourself living one of these moments, when you feel the effect before its cause, when time slips and the story collapses, do not dismiss it as error. Recognize it for what it is. A glimpse of the true structure of existence, where beginnings and endings chase each other in circles, and nothing is ever truly first. So, The next time you drop a glass and only afterward feel the hand that knocked it, the next time you grieve before the news or scream before the wound. Pause. You may have just stepped into the loop, the place where cause and effect dissolve into each other. And in that loop, you will realize the haunting truth, that perhaps everything you are has already happened, and everything you will be has already begun. Infinite regression, time loop. There is a concept that terrifies not because it is violent or monstrous, but because it seems endless, an infinite descent into itself. Imagine standing in front of two mirrors facing each other, your reflection bouncing back and forth, smaller and smaller, fading into the distance. That is a metaphor most people know. But now imagine those mirrors are not glass, but time itself. Every moment reflects into another, every loop contains another loop, and there is no bottom, no outside, no escape. This is the infinite regression time loop. It begins simply enough. An event repeats. You relive a day, a choice, a conversation. At first, it feels like déjà vu, strange but explainable. But then you notice that within that repetition there is another repetition nested inside, a loop inside the loop. Perhaps you relive the same conversation, but inside that moment, a phrase keeps repeating, and within that phrase, a thought doubles back on itself. You are no longer in a circle. You are in a spiral. Each layer contains another smaller layer, like Russian dolls of time, endlessly swallowing one another. Think of dreams where you wake up only to discover you are still dreaming. You try again, only to wake into another false morning, and then another. At some point, you no longer know if you have ever truly awakened. That is what the infinite regression time loop feels like. A hall of mirrors not made of glass, but of causality, where every action generates another cycle, and every cycle hides another cycle within it. Philosophers have wrestled with the horror of infinite regress for centuries. The question, what caused the first cause, leads not to answers but to a chain with no beginning. In logic, infinite regress is a failure to arrive at truth, a collapse into endless justification. But when applied to time, it becomes not just an intellectual trap, but an existential one. If your life is caught in such a loop, every attempt to break free simply places you in another layer of the same pattern. You may escape one cycle only to find it is nested within a larger cycle, and that within another, and so on forever. Some have reported experiences uncannily close to this. People who, under certain altered states of consciousness, describe falling into time within time, moments subdividing endlessly until the idea of linear flow collapses. Others in near-death states have claimed that they relived their entire life in an instant, and within each moment of that life, relived every smaller moment again, a fractal of time, recursive and unbearable. It is not just reliving the past, it is reliving the act of reliving, endlessly. The psychological toll of even imagining this is immense, because we rely on beginnings and endings to stay sane. We wake, we sleep, we measure. But the infinite regression time loop dissolves those boundaries. It suggests that there is no true waking, no true exit. Every doorway is just another frame within a larger hall. The sense of progress becomes illusion. You are not moving forward, you are only moving deeper into the mirror. And yet, there is a strange allure to it, for in its endlessness, there is a kind of perfection. A loop inside a loop ensures that nothing is ever truly lost. Every moment exists forever, contained inside itself, layered infinitely. If you kiss someone, that kiss repeats. Not once, not twice, but endlessly within the architecture of recursion. Every joy, every grief, every breath is immortalized by being folded into itself forever. The terror and the beauty are inseparable. But here is the darker thought. What if this is already our condition? What if what we call life is not a straight line, but a recursive loop, replaying itself inside larger and larger cycles? When you feel déjà vu, maybe it is not a glitch. It is the moment you glimpse one of the inner loops, the echo of repetition inside repetition. Perhaps our entire universe is not expanding outward, but folding inward, collapsing into infinite regression. In ancient myth, some cultures hinted at this. Hindu cosmology spoke of time as cyclical, ages repeating endlessly. The Stoics believed in the eternal return, that everything would happen again, precisely in an infinite cycle. But the infinite regression time loop is even more unsettling, because it is not a circle returning to its start. It is a spiral folding forever, like a hall of mirrors that does not simply reflect, but consumes its own reflection. So what happens if you encounter this loop? If you find yourself inside it, how do you know? Perhaps you already are. Perhaps every time you blink, you fall into a smaller layer, another subdivision, another mirrored room. Perhaps you will never know which layer you truly occupy, because the illusion of stability is the only way consciousness survives the recursion. And maybe, just maybe, the sensation of eternity after death is not heaven or hell, but the infinite regression time loop swallowing you whole, your life fractaling into itself forever. To think of it is dizzying. To imagine living it is unbearable. And yet, it whispers an unavoidable truth. Every reflection we see, every repetition we feel, may be hinting that reality itself is not linear at all, but endlessly recursive. A hall of mirrors where the final reflection is never reached, because there is no final reflection, only the eternal swallowing of itself. Self-creating origin paradox. Imagine being told the story of an object that should not exist, and yet it does. A book, perhaps, found in an attic with no record of its printing, no author on its cover. You open it, and inside are diagrams, words, ideas far beyond your time. You show it to others, you copy it, you publish it anew. Decades later, someone else finds your version of the book, and eventually, in some twist of fate, it is placed back in that same attic for you to find as a child. The circle closes, and you realize with a shock that the book has no true origin. It exists because it caused itself to exist. This is the self-creating origin paradox, an event or object that erases the very idea of beginnings, collapsing causality into an endless loop. At first, your mind resists it. Everything you know about the world insists on a starting point. Every fire needs a spark. Every river needs a spring. Every life needs a birth. To imagine something existing without origin feels like trying to walk through a mirror. Impossible, absurd. And yet the paradox refuses to leave. You sense its truth in the background of reality, whispering that maybe beginnings are illusions, and that existence itself can bend back upon itself in ways you cannot escape. Time travel stories often wrestle with this puzzle. Picture a scientist who one day receives the plans for a time machine in the mail. She studies them, builds the machine, and then, years later, travels back in time to give those plans to her younger self. The plans had no author, no first spark of creativity. They exist only because the loop preserves them. Who invented the machine? No one. And yet, it exists. This is not mere fiction. Philosophers and physicists use such thought experiments to probe the boundaries of causality, asking if the universe itself could be such a loop. There is a haunting power in such an idea, because it suggests that cause and effect are not the straight line we imagine, but a circle, twisting back upon itself until questions of before and after lose meaning. When you look at your own life, how many things feel like they caused themselves? The passion you pursue now was sparked by something you discovered as a child, but perhaps you only discovered it because you were already destined to pursue it. A strange loop, self-fulfilling, where the origin dissolves the closer you look. Science has glimpses of this too. In physics, there are equations where time appears symmetric, where the arrow of time points both ways, and the universe could in principle be its own cause. Some cosmologists even speculate that the universe itself may be a closed loop, expanding and contracting endlessly, or existing as a self-contained cycle with no outside cause. If so, asking what began it all becomes meaningless. It began because it already was. The human mind rebels, but also aches with recognition, because deep down, we already live this paradox. Think of memory. You remember yourself because you remember yourself. The act of being you today affirms the being you were yesterday, creating a loop of continuity that feels like origin. Think of identity. You believe in who you are because you act as who you are, each reinforcing the other until the question of where you began dissolves. Like the book in the attic, your selfhood feels authored but authorless, a story that writes itself by existing. But the paradox is not just philosophical, it is deeply unsettling. Because if something can exist without origin, what else can? What if the laws of reality themselves are loops, sustained not by foundations, but by their own echoes? What if the world you touch is only here because it insists on being here, not because it was created by anything outside itself. To stand inside such a thought is to feel the ground shift under your feet, as if the very notion of creation is a myth you were taught to soothe your need for beginnings. Myths and religions, too, carry traces of this paradox. Some traditions describe gods or beings who created themselves, born without parent or cause. In Hindu cosmology, Brahma is said to emerge from the cosmic lotus, but the lotus itself arises from Brahman, the self-existent ground of being. In Egyptian myth, Atum created himself out of the void, standing alone as the first cause of all things. These are not just tales, but human attempts to grapple with the impossible idea of something arising from nothing, or worse, from itself. And yet, perhaps this paradox is not a trap, but a liberation. If existence can be self-creating, then maybe meaning does not need an origin either. Maybe purpose is not something handed down from outside, but something that emerges because it sustains itself. Your choices, your loves, your fears, they may not need a first cause. They may exist because they circle back, weaving continuity from their own repetition. Like the book, like the machine, like the universe itself, they are real because they affirm their own reality. Still, the discomfort lingers. We are creatures addicted to origins. We demand beginnings, first movers, sparks to ignite flames. To face the self-creating origin paradox is to face the possibility that there never was a spark, never was a start, only a loop forever spinning. You stand before that circle, staring, and realize there is no entry point. The only way in is to already be inside, and perhaps you always have been. So when you encounter this paradox, let it unsettle you. Let it erode your need for simple beginnings. Because in its dizzying spiral lies a profound truth. Some things exist, not because they were made, but because they exist. A circle without start, without end, erasing the very idea of creation. Yet, leaving behind the one undeniable fact, you are here, caught in the loop, and maybe that has always been enough. Mirrored future reflection. There are moments in life that do not feel like beginnings, but like echoes. Events that arrive with the weight of déjà vu, as though they were not unfolding for the first time, but replaying a script already written. This is the strangeness of the mirrored future reflection, when the future does not simply wait to be born, but leans backward into the present, shaping every gesture, every word, every accident with uncanny precision. It begins subtly. You are walking home and suddenly feel as though the street is staging itself around you. The car that passes too slowly, the flicker of a neon sign, the stranger glancing up at the exact moment your eyes shift. None of these details feel random. They feel choreographed, like props moving into place for a scene whose climax has already been rehearsed. You cannot explain it, yet in your chest there grows an ache of recognition, the feeling that you are not living life forward, but backward, tracing steps toward a conclusion that has already chosen you. I knew someone who described sitting in a cafe when a glass slipped from a waiter's hand and shattered on the floor. In that instant, she felt a rush of terror so sharp she froze. She didn't understand why. Until months later, standing in an airport, another glass broke in a different hand, and the exact same flood of voices, faces, and scents surrounded her. Only this time, it was followed by news that would forever alter her life. She swore the earlier moment had been a rehearsal, a mirrored prelude echoing from the future. Psychologists might call this pattern making, the mind's hunger for narrative. But what if the hunger itself is proof? What if time is not a line but a hall of mirrors, and every step you take reflects not only what came before, but also what lies ahead? In such a hall, the present is never innocent. It is always charged with the fingerprints of what is to come. Think about the dreams you've dismissed. A hallway, a color of light, the sound of a clock. Months later, you find yourself in that hallway, bathed in that exact light, your skin crawling with recognition. You dismiss it as coincidence, but part of you knows the dream was not imagination. It was a mirror tilted forward, bouncing the light of the future into your present mind. The mirrored future reflection carries both comfort and dread. Comfort because it suggests your life is part of a pattern, not random fragments. Dread because it suggests that the pattern may already be closed, your choice is already etched into the glass. When you sense it, you cannot help but wonder, am I living or am I simply rehearsing? Is this argument, this touch, this accident merely a draft of the moment when the real event will arrive? I once met a man who said he had lived his entire life under the shadow of one image, standing in a field at dusk, holding a letter while smoke rose on the horizon. He had never been in that field, never held such a letter, and yet he recognized its reality so completely that he measured every day against it. He claimed his choices, what job to take, whom to love, where to live, were all shaped by the certainty that one day he would arrive in that field. When I asked him if the vision scared him, he shook his head. "No," he said, "because it means my life is not wandering. I am walking toward the place I've already seen." But what happens when the mirrored future is not kind? What if the reflection that leaks into your present is one of loss, of catastrophe? Do you resist it, or does resistance itself become the very path that ensures its arrival? This is the paradox of the reflection. You cannot tell if you are avoiding it or embodying it. Every attempt to change it feels like another rehearsal, another step into the choreography. Yet perhaps it is not doom, but invitation. A mirrored future does not have to mean inevitability. It may mean intimacy, proof that time is less a straight road and more a woven fabric, where the threads of tomorrow rub constantly against the threads of now. If the present feels like rehearsal, maybe that is because life is generous enough to give us more than one chance. Perhaps the scene repeats until you are ready to meet it fully. So when you sense the mirrored future reflection, when your skin tingles with the feeling that today is already decided, do not rush to dismiss it. Listen, notice the details, the sound in the air, the angle of light, the way your heart slows or quickens. These may be the brushstrokes of a future that has already painted you, reaching back to remind you of your place in the canvas. And when that future finally arrives, when the rehearsal becomes the scene, you will know. Not because it feels new, but because it feels like coming home to something you have always carried. You will step into the moment, not as a stranger, but as an actor who knows their lines by heart. And in that uncanny recognition, you will glimpse the secret of time itself, that every present is a reflection, every reflection a rehearsal, and every rehearsal a truth waiting patiently to unfold. Clockwork universe loop. Imagine a universe wound as tightly as a clock. Every gear interlocks, every tooth catches perfectly. Every motion is predetermined before it even occurs. This is the clockwork universe loop, a reality so rigid in its timeline that spontaneity becomes an illusion, and free will dissolves into choreography written before the first star ignited. In such a universe, each second is not just followed by the next, it already contains the next. Cause and effect collapse into a script that cannot deviate, no matter how much we imagine ourselves choosing. If you decide to raise your hand right now, that act was encoded into the machinery of time long before you thought it. Your decision is not a spark of freedom, but the unfolding of a sequence. The clock never asks permission to tick. It simply ticks. This is not merely philosophy. Physics, at its core, often whispers the same thing. Newtonian mechanics, for example, described a universe where, if you knew the position and momentum of every particle, you could predict the entire future with absolute certainty. Like watching billiard balls scatter on a table and being able to calculate every collision for eternity. Later, Laplace's demon gave this idea sharper edges. An intellect vast enough it could see all past and future in a single glance, because the cosmos was a machine without randomness. In such a view, your birth, your loves, your betrayals, your final breath, all were inscribed in the cosmic gears long before you arrived to live them. But this loop is not only scientific, it's psychological. Consider déjà vu when a moment feels rehearsed, or the eerie precision of cause and effect in your life, when every choice seems to collapse into inevitability no matter what path you pick. Even regret, the haunting sense that it could not have been otherwise, feels like the signature of a clockwork script. Our minds rebel against it, grasping at the idea of freedom. But the loop holds firm. And yet, paradox creeps in. If everything is predetermined, what is the meaning of consciousness itself? Why should a machine require awareness if the program cannot be altered? One chilling answer: perhaps awareness is not for choice, but for witness. The universe loops not because you direct it, but because you must watch it unfold. Like a character trapped in a film, unable to change the lines, but condemned to feel each word as if it were yours. Still, the loop carries its own strange comfort. If every second already knows the next, then your failures were inevitable. But so were your triumphs. The heartbreaks you endured were etched into the gears, but so was every laugh, every fleeting beauty, every embrace. Destiny in this frame is not a threat, but a guarantee. You cannot miss your life, because it is already yours in its entirety, from start to finish, wound into the mechanism of existence. So, the Clockwork Universe loop is both prison and liberation. No free will, but also no chaos. No choice, but no true mistakes. A universe so precise that it doesn't need your permission to turn, only your presence to feel it turn. And in that endless, inevitable ticking, perhaps the only freedom left is how you learn to love the rhythm. Endless decision repetition. There is a nightmare buried inside the architecture of choice, a paradox of freedom that bends into a prison. Imagine making a decision, something simple at first. You turn left instead of right. You speak instead of remaining silent. You take a risk instead of retreating. In ordinary life, that choice becomes a line, a direction, a single unfolding future. But in this strange and terrible phenomenon, the choice does not end when it is made. It replays endlessly through time itself, until every possible outcome is lived. Not one, not two, but all. And yet, even after every path is exhausted, you are not released. You are thrown back to the beginning, forced to choose again. This is the endless decision repetition, an eternal cycle where freedom becomes suffocation, and the loop becomes your cage. It begins innocently, almost invisibly. You feel the flicker of déjà vu when you decide something trivial, as if you had already chosen. Later, the sensation grows heavier. You feel as though you are walking two lives at once, each equally real, the version where you answered yes, and the version where you whispered no. And before long, the distinction between past and present dissolves entirely, because you are living both, then living their consequences, then returning to the origin point, over and over, as though time refuses to accept that one reality must be enough. Think of the terror of a crossroads that never resolves. Every time you try to step forward, you are pulled back. If you choose safety, you are flung into the life of danger anyway. If you choose love, you are still forced to endure loneliness in another cycle. You cannot win, because winning is irrelevant. The loop is not about outcome. It is about repetition. A choice replayed through time until it is stripped of meaning, until even the word choice collapses into absurdity. Philosophers hinted at this nightmare long ago. Nietzsche imagined the eternal return, the crushing thought experiment where every action you take must be lived again, endlessly, for eternity. In his vision, you are judged not by morality, but by your ability to affirm such endless recurrence. But endless decision. Repetition twists the knife deeper, because it does not return only the same decision. It ensures you live every alternative. You cannot comfort yourself with having chosen correctly, because every incorrect version still waits, and must still be lived. Freedom of choice becomes futility of choice. Psychologists, too, brush against this horror when they speak of counterfactual thinking. Regret is the mind's way of replaying decisions, imagining what would have been. But here, it is not imagination. It is reality fracturing. The regret becomes lived, the alternatives as vivid as memory, until you are caught in a carousel of your own agency. Some people already describe experiences that echo this. Dreams where they relive one decision endlessly with every possible outcome flashing in sequence, or near-death moments where a single choice branches into countless lives flashing before their eyes. To live this not in dream, but in waking, would be to drown in possibility itself. And what does it do to identity, to live like this? If you are condemned to experience every version of your choices, then which self is truly you? The cautious one, the reckless one, the broken one, the triumphant one, or are you nothing at all, just a revolving door for infinite selves to pass through? In endless decision repetition, the self dissolves. You are not the chooser, but the chosen mechanism by which the loop forces possibility to unfold. You become not a person, but a stage for choices to replay until time itself collapses from exhaustion. Some traditions hint at this endless cycle in myth. Buddhist cosmology speaks of samsara, the cycle of rebirth, lives repeating until enlightenment frees one from recurrence. The Mayans spoke of cycles of worlds, created and destroyed again and again, but the endless decision repetition is more intimate than cosmic cycles. It is not the repetition of worlds, but of your smallest, most fragile choices. A single whispered yes or no becomes the wheel of eternity. And if you ask, can it be escaped? The paradox turns crueler. For even escape is just another outcome, another branch the loop demands you experience. You may find a version of yourself that breaks free, but in the next return, you are bound again. The loop allows you every outcome, except final release. And so, even freedom becomes another mask of captivity. Perhaps that is why we sometimes feel exhaustion at choices that should not matter. The weight you feel at trivial decisions, the diner meal, the seat you take, the phrase you choose in passing, may be the faint echo of this eternal loop pressing against you. Somewhere, some version of you has already lived every branch, and the fatigue you feel is not indecision, but memory bleeding through, the memory of having chosen it all and still returning. So what do, trapped in the endless decision repetition? Maybe you learn that meaning cannot be found in choosing differently, but in choosing fully. To live as though every choice matters, not because it alters the loop, but because it affirms your will within it. Maybe that is the only act of defiance left, to embrace the repetition, to live as though eternity itself is not a cage, but a mirror. But in the darkest corner of your mind, you wonder, if every choice will be repeated endlessly, what is happening right now? This moment, this breath, this thought, has it already happened infinite times before? Will it happen infinite times again? And if so, are you living your life, or only rehearsing it forever inside the loop of time? Orbital timeline convergence. There are moments in history, and perhaps in our own lives, that feel impossibly heavy. So much weight pressing into a single point, as though time itself bends toward it. You stand within it and sense that this instant is more than an instant. It is an intersection, a place where paths not meant to meet collapse into one another. This is the orbital timeline convergence. Multiple timelines spiral like planets around a star, drawn by a gravitational force that refuses to let them remain separate. And when they collide, destinies merge, leaving behind scars and revelations that cannot be undone. Picture it like this. Every choice you make branches into another trajectory, another orbit of reality. Most of the time, these orbits remain distinct, spiraling away into their own futures. But sometimes, for reasons no one can explain, they are pulled back, circling tighter and tighter until they intersect. You, who chose differently in 1,000 different lives, find those choices circling around one moment. It may be a meeting, a decision, a catastrophe, a kiss, a goodbye. And in that moment, every version of you arrives at once, colliding in the same gravitational center. Have you ever felt as though the air thickened around you, that a moment carried far more significance than it should? Perhaps you told yourself it was emotion or coincidence or imagination. But what if it was physics? Not the physics of particles, but the physics of timelines, folding in on themselves like celestial bodies collapsing into orbit. That sense of déjà vu, that overwhelming awareness that this moment matters, may not be a trick of the mind at all. It may be the weight of timelines converging. Science has danced around this possibility. Theories of multiverses suggest infinite worlds spinning outward from every choice. But physicists also know that gravity bends not only matter, but time. If gravity can warp space-time, could it also warp timelines themselves? Perhaps certain events generate such density of meaning, such gravitational pull of consequence, that other versions of reality cannot resist orbiting them. Wars, inventions, accidents, loves, all may act like singularities, pulling versions of history into collision. And what happens when they do? Reports from people who swear they have felt it speak of overwhelming disorientation, a sense of living not just their life, but flickers of countless others in the same second. One woman describes standing at a crosswalk and feeling in an instant both the life in which she stepped forward safely and the life in which she was struck by a car. Both lives screamed through her body, leaving her trembling, alive yet haunted by the shadow of death that should have been. Another man claimed he met a stranger and instantly knew them, as a friend, as a rival, as a lover, all at once, as though every version of their connection had collapsed into a single meeting. The collision of timelines does not erase futures. It merges them violently into one. In myth, Echoes of this idea appear everywhere. The Greeks spoke of moirai, the fates, weaving threads that sometimes tangled catastrophically. Norse tales told of Ragnarok as a moment where all timelines, all destinies, converged into a single world-ending battle. Even prophecy in countless cultures carries this undertone, not prediction, but convergence, the meeting of countless possible futures into a moment that cannot be avoided. But perhaps the most unsettling truth is this: convergence is not rare. It happens more often than we realize. Only we interpret it as déjà vu, as intuition, as uncanny timing. When you sense that your life has reached a crossroads more real than others, when you feel a pull so strong it borders on compulsion, you may be standing at the point of convergence. A moment when multiple versions of you, multiple versions of your world, cannot help but collide. The consequences are never clean. To merge is to fracture. Something must be lost. Something must be gained. After convergence, you may walk away changed in ways you cannot name. A scar appears in memory. Not of what happened, but of what nearly happened, of what did happen elsewhere. You may carry grief for a life you did not live, or affection for someone you barely know. These are not illusions. They are the residue of timelines merged into your own. And if this sounds terrifying, remember this too. Convergence is also opportunity. For in these moments, you are not only haunted by the lives you could have lived, you are infused by them. The courage you never had in one life may surge into you from another. The wisdom you lacked may whisper from the choices another you already made. Convergence does not only judge you, it equips you. It is the universe folding its orbits together, reminding you that you are larger than the single thread you believe yourself to be. So, the next time you feel the weight of a moment pressing down, the uncanny sense that everything is spiraling toward this point, do not dismiss it as coincidence. Recognize it as an orbital timeline convergence, a gravitational knot in the fabric of destiny. And remember, in that collision, you are not only the sum of your past, you are the meeting of infinite futures, merged into the self that now stands at the center. Reverse entropy cycle. Imagine stepping into a span of time where everything you thought you knew about reality folds in on itself. The air does not move forward, but backward. Leaves do not fall from trees, but reassemble themselves. Broken glass rises from the floor to become whole again. The familiar hum of entropy, the slow drift toward disorder, is reversed. In this place, decay does not consume, it heals. What was fractured rebinds, what was forgotten resurfaces. You stand inside the reverse entropy cycle, a current of time where the arrow no longer points toward collapse, but toward an impossible rewinding. The first shock comes not from the world around you, but from within. Memories begin forming before you've lived the events that create them. You know the words of conversations before they leave your lips. You feel nostalgia for encounters you haven't yet had. The future presses against you like an ancient weight. Heavy, weathered, older than the past you thought carried the burden of age. It is as though tomorrow has already lived 1,000 lifetimes, and yesterday is newborn, fragile, barely awake. Science tells us entropy is law. The second law of thermodynamics insists that the universe trends toward disorder, that time's arrow is nothing more than the spread of energy from concentrated states into chaos. Ice melts, stars burn out, memories fade. But in the reverse entropy cycle, this principle is broken. The arrow flips. Instead of dissolving, structures form. Instead of fading, patterns strengthen. Imagine if your mind became clearest at the end of life, if memory crystallized into perfection, if the future was not an unknown blank, but an ancient script replaying itself in reverse. This is more than a thought experiment. It is a mirror held to the deepest unease we carry, because part of us already senses life as a slow erosion, a march toward disorder. The fantasy of reversed entropy is not only strange, it is seductive. To watch ruin rebuild itself, to feel youth rising in the bones of the old, to believe that nothing is truly lost, but only waiting for its return. Myths have always whispered of golden ages and cycles where the world renews itself. Perhaps these myths are distant echoes of some unconscious recognition that time does not only flow forward, and yet the cycle is not comforting. Because when time runs backward, so does causality. To remember something before it happens is also to lose the innocence of not knowing. If your tears form before your heartbreak, if your joy fades before the moment that should give birth to it, the weight of existence becomes unbearable. the freedom of choice collapses. Every action already remembered, every decision already decayed into inevitability. What we call the future becomes not a horizon, but a graveyard, ancient and immutable, and the past nothing more than its fragile seedling. Think of what identity means in such a loop. In our world, you believe you are the sum of your memories, accumulated like sediment from lived experience. But here, memories precede experience. You know yourself not from what you have done, but from what you are destined to do. You live forward while remembering backward, and the two motions tear at one another like opposing tides. To exist in the reverse entropy cycle is to dissolve in both directions at once, rebuilt and undone simultaneously. Some physicists speculate that our universe itself might contain regions where time flows differently, where entropy reverses. In cosmology, near the singularities of black holes, or at the very edges of expansion, equations hint at possibilities where order might rise instead of collapse. But even if such places exist, could consciousness survive them? Could a mind anchored in linear causality endure being flooded by memories of what has not yet occurred? Or would it shatter, unable to distinguish between remembering and anticipating? Perhaps the reverse entropy cycle is not a physical location, but a metaphor already embedded in our lives. Consider how grief works. Sometimes you feel the memory of loss before the final moment of parting, as though your body knows what is coming and mourns in advance. Or how love sometimes feels ancient even at its first spark, as if it arrived before its time, aged by a future you haven't lived yet. In these moments, entropy does not simply move forward. It bends, flickers, reveals its fragility. And yet, maybe the true terror of this cycle is not the collapse of causality, but the collapse of meaning. Because what does it mean to live if endings precede beginnings? If the future is older than the past, if knowledge arrives before experience, then life is no longer a journey, but a script unraveling in both directions at once. You are no longer a traveler, but a knot in the fabric of reversed time, pulled apart, restitched, endlessly ancient, endlessly newborn. Still, within this paradox, there is a strange beauty. For if decay can reverse, then perhaps nothing is ever truly lost. Perhaps memory and experience are not separate at all, but threads woven in two directions, one from the past forward, one from the future backward, meeting in the fragile present where you stand. The reverse entropy cycle may erase the idea of linear creation, but it offers something else in return. The vision of a universe where every loss is also a restoration, where every ending is also a beginning, and where the oldest thing in existence may very well be tomorrow. Key event preemption. There is a strange cruelty buried in the way fate plays with us. You see a shadow rising in the distance. You hear the whisper of disaster, and you act. Because what else can you do? You tighten your grip on the wheel, you cancel the flight, you leave 5 minutes earlier, you speak the warning before the words can curdle into regret. And yet, somehow, it is that very action, the one meant to protect, to prevent, to save, that becomes the precise spark that lights the fire. This is the paradox of key event preemption, when the effort to defy fate is the hidden mechanism that ensures it. It begins innocently with a decision made in fear. A man reads that a certain bridge is unstable. He takes a longer route to avoid it. On that road, an accident occurs, one he would have missed had he taken the bridge. He tells himself it was chance, but then it happens again. A woman cancels her train ride after a dream of derailment, only to be struck by the taxi she took instead. Each story piles upon the other, until you begin to see the pattern. The prevention was not escape. The prevention was the invitation. History itself is littered with such cruel turns. Consider the king who locked his daughter in a tower to prevent her prophecy of ruin, only for that isolation to set in motion the very downfall foretold. Consider the generals who, fearing attack, launched a preemptive strike that triggered the war they swore they were trying to avoid. The story repeats across centuries and across lives. In seeking to close the door, we throw it wide open. Why does this happen? Perhaps because fate does not simply exist ahead of us. It coils backward, weaving its roots into our attempts to resist it. By the time we sense disaster, its pattern is already traced into the fabric of our choices. We move to block it, but in moving, we press against the very switch designed to ignite it. Think of your own life. Have you ever said something only to stop a fight, but your words became the spark that made it erupt? Have you ever held back out of fear, only to lose the opportunity because you hesitated? Have you ever rushed forward to prevent pain, only to cause the very wound you dreaded? Each of these is a small rehearsal of the larger paradox, a reminder that the line between prevention and creation is so thin it is almost invisible. The terror of key event preemption is not just that disaster comes. It is that you become complicit in its arrival. You live with the gnawing suspicion that had you done nothing, the moment might have passed. But in acting, you carved the path that fate required. The guilt is sharper than the loss, because it was your hand, your voice, your choice, that sealed what you tried so desperately to escape. And yet, buried in the cruelty is also a dark lesson. Fate does not bend to avoidance. It bends to acceptance. The more you resist, the tighter the knot becomes, the more the future sharpens its teeth. But when you allow yourself to move without desperation, when you choose not from fear but from presence, sometimes the pattern loosens. The storm still comes, yes, but not always in the form you feared. The key event may still arrive, but it need not crush you. I knew someone who dreamed of a fire destroying her home. Terrified, she unplugged every appliance, checked every lock, avoided candles, avoided cooking. She was consumed by vigilance. And then one night, in her panic to blow out a candle she hadn't meant to light, she knocked it to the floor and watched the dream ignite before her eyes. Later, after the ashes cooled, she told me she had realized the dream was never meant to be stopped. It was meant to be lived, and it was her fear that carried the flame into reality. This is the trap of preemption, the belief that you are clever enough to outrun inevitability. The universe, in its cold amusement, often proves otherwise. The harder you push against the wheel, the faster it turns. The tighter you grip the rope, the deeper it cuts into your skin. So what are we to do? Some argue for surrender, to let the tide come without resistance. Others argue for action, but action born not of panic, but of clarity. To act not to escape disaster, but to meet it on your own terms, shaping how it finds you. There is a difference between avoiding a fire and preparing water. One fuels the paradox, the other reshapes it. If you feel that pull, the sense that your effort to prevent something may be feeding it, pause. Ask yourself, am I moving from fear or from wisdom? Am I rehearsing fate or am I rewriting it? The answer may decide whether the event becomes a prophecy fulfilled or a shadow that passes. And yet, even knowing this, the paradox will still find you. Because part of being human is the compulsion to reach, to save, to protect. And when the key event arrives, you may recognize your fingerprints upon it, but do not let guilt consume you. For perhaps the deeper truth is this: the event was always waiting. Your hand upon it does not mark you as its author, only as its witness. And in that moment, you may glimpse the harsh grace of fate, that even our mistakes are woven into its design, that even our failures are part of the way it teaches us to live. Butterfly timeline collapse. Picture time as a vast meadow filled with butterflies. Each one is a timeline, delicate, shimmering, fragile. Every flap of its wings sends ripples outward, some barely felt, others catastrophic. Now, imagine that in this meadow of infinite possibilities, one butterfly is brushed too hard, its wings torn. The result is not just the end of that one path. It is the collapse of an entire set of futures that depended on its flight. This is the butterfly timeline collapse, where the smallest change in the past erases whole architectures of possibility, collapsing countless realities into a single fragile thread. It is the ultimate vulnerability of existence, that everything you know, every memory, every person you love, depends on the survival of moments so fragile that they could have shattered under the lightest touch. A man missing a train in 1914 prevents a war. A child dropping a stone in 1960 alters the mood of a passerby who would have written a book that reshaped a generation. A single syllable unspoken in a conversation decades ago shifts who marries whom, which child is born, which inventions are dreamed, which disasters unfold. Each tiny adjustment is not small at all. It is the silent reweaving of the entire tapestry of reality. We often romanticize the butterfly effect, how little things matter, how small kindnesses can ripple, but the collapse is darker. It is not expansion, but annihilation. When one thread is chosen, countless others are destroyed. When a person survives an accident, it erases the timelines where they did not, timelines that will never again exist. Survival itself is an act of collapse, where reality discards infinite selves so that one may continue. Every present is haunted by the ghosts of futures that never survived the last flap of the wings. Physics, too, whispers this danger. Chaos theory reminds us that initial conditions define everything, that weather, evolution, history are all exquisitely sensitive to the smallest starting point. Quantum mechanics adds a more unsettling twist. In the many worlds interpretation, every possibility exists, but each collapse of the wave function prunes them into singularity for the observer. You may live on in one fragile branch, but an uncountable forest of you has just died in silence. And think of memory. Sometimes we recall the past differently than it was. But what if those errors are not mistakes at all, but glimpses into the collapsed timelines? Faces we swear existed but don't. Conversations we know happened, but no one else remembers. Whole childhood houses recalled in detail, but absent from maps. These could be the fractures left behind by butterflies whose wings were brushed, leaving us stranded on the surviving thread, while the others withered into non-existence. This collapse also dismantles the idea of permanence. What is history if every second collapses infinite others to dust? What is identity if your every thought closes off entire versions of yourself forever? You are not just living. You are constantly killing countless potential selves, trimming existence into a single line with each breath. And yet, within that fragility lies meaning. The fact that we are here, now, means this fragile thread has survived billions of collapses. Every breath you take is the survivor of endless deaths of alternate futures. Every person you know is the victor of a cosmic lottery where infinite versions of them were extinguished. This fragility is terrifying, but it is also precious. To live is to stand on the last surviving wing of a butterfly that should have collapsed 1,000 times before, and yet still beats. The butterfly timeline collapse is not only a thought experiment, it is a reminder that our existence is impossibly contingent, unbearably fragile, and therefore infinitely rare. And maybe, knowing that every moment kills infinite futures just to let this one exist, the most radical act is to honor it, to breathe it in, fragile though it is, as the only reality that remains. Quantum jump displacement. There are moments when reality itself seems to stumble, as though the universe skipped a beat. 1 second you are here, in a room, in a conversation, in a moment you understand. And then, without transition, without passage, you are elsewhere. Another place, another second, another fragment of your life, as though you leapt across time without walking through it. This is the unsettling phenomenon of quantum jump displacement, the experience of a sudden shift to another moment, without passing through the time in between, tearing apart the sequence of cause and effect. It is not like fainting, not like sleep, not like drifting into a dream. Those states have continuity. You fall, you fade, you wake. Quantum displacement has none. You are simply cut. One frame of reality is stripped away, and the next is imposed, like an editor slicing film. And the strangest part is that everything continues around you as if nothing has happened. The people beside you keep speaking. The clock ticks on. But you know, because you felt the rupture, that you skipped the bridge between. Some describe it as stepping over seconds the way one might step over stones in a river. You don't swim through the water. You simply appear on the next rock, leaving the current of time rushing unseen beneath you. The effect is deeply disorienting because our entire identity is built upon continuity. We are who we are because one moment leads into the next, thought into action, cause into effect. But what are you if the cause is erased, if you leap into an effect without ever touching its root? There are documented whispers of such experiences. People who swear they were driving on one road, only to find themselves suddenly miles ahead, with no memory of the journey in between. Hikers who walk a trail and realize they have skipped entire stretches, emerging in places impossible to reach in the time elapsed. Even in everyday life, some feel the sharp jolt of a time skip, a sudden awareness that a piece of their life just vanished, replaced by a continuation they cannot account for. Scientists might call it a lapse of attention, a seizure, or a blackout. But those who have lived it insist it was not loss of awareness. It was reality itself that skipped. Physics has long entertained strange ideas that brush against this. Quantum mechanics tells us that particles do not move continuously, but jump between states, appearing here, then there, without existing in between. Could consciousness itself sometimes slip this way, not flowing through time but hopping across it? If so, quantum jump displacement might not be a glitch of the brain, but a glimpse of the universe's deeper architecture. Reality unfolding not as a smooth film, but as frames cut and rearranged. The horror lies not only in the jump, but in the implications. If you can skip across time, then continuity is a lie. The life you think you are living may not be a single thread at all, but a collection of spliced segments stitched together so seamlessly you rarely notice the gaps. What you call you may already be a series of jumps, edited into coherence by a mind that cannot bear the truth of missing time. And then there is the dread of what you might be skipping into. If cause and effect are broken, then what anchors you to your fate? What if the you who arrives after the jump is not the same as the you who left? What if every displacement drops you into a slightly altered version of your life? A timeline fractionally off from the one you remember? Perhaps this explains the eerie sensation some feel when familiar objects look subtly wrong, or when people closest to them seem to shift in minor but undeniable ways. They call it the Mandela effect. You might call it the residue of quantum displacement. In folklore, there are shadows of this idea. Celtic tales of people stepping into fairy rings and emerging hours or years later, time missing between. Shamanic traditions of traveling outside time to return with visions. Even modern accounts of alien abduction echo the same strangeness. Missing hours, gaps in memory, sudden reappearances with the world unchanged, but the self forever marked. Whether myth or report, they point to the same disquiet, that we are not bound to time as tightly as we believe. But imagine the existential terror of realizing it is happening to you not once, but constantly. Every blink, every breath might hide a cut. Every heartbeat might be an edit. You never notice because your mind stitches the gaps together, inventing the illusion of flow. Quantum jump. Displacement may not be an anomaly at all. It may be the very fabric of existence. You think you are moving through time, but you are actually jumping across fragments, your life an infinite series of displacements. So the next time you feel a jolt, a sudden blank, a skipped beat in the fabric of your day, pause. Do not dismiss it as fatigue or distraction. Consider that you may have just leapt across time, bypassing the moments that should have carried you there. Consider that the world you return to may not be exactly the one you left. And ask yourself the question no one dares. If time is only a sequence of jumps, then where, exactly, were you in the moments you did not live? Predestined chronicle paradox. There is a paradox whispered of in philosophy, religion, and speculative science alike. A haunting thought that chills not because it is violent, but because it is inescapable. Imagine a book, a scroll, a carved tablet, a digital file. It does not matter the medium, containing not what has been, but what will be, a record of events not yet lived, but already inscribed. And here lies the terror. The very act of reading it ensures that it will happen exactly as written. This is the predestined chronicle paradox, a cage of prophecy where history is bound, not by freedom or chance, but by the weight of its own record. At first, it sounds almost comforting, the certainty of knowing what tomorrow holds, no more doubt, no more choices aching to be made. But certainty is not freedom, certainty is a prison. For when you read such a chronicle, you realize you are no longer living. You are only acting out a script. If the chronicle says you will betray someone, you will. If it says you will succeed, you will. If it says you will die tomorrow, then every breath you take only walks you closer to that sentence. The knowledge does not empower you. It ensnares you, because in knowing, you cannot do otherwise. This paradox has haunted myths across centuries. In Greek tragedy, prophecies always came true, precisely because they were known. Oedipus, warned he would kill his father and marry his mother, tried to flee fate, only to fulfill it by fleeing. The act of resistance was the very mechanism by which destiny locked into place. In Norse myth, the prophecy of Ragnarok, the end of gods and men, was told long before it arrived. Every action the gods took to prevent it became the threads weaving it closer. The chronicle is not passive, it is active. The ink does not simply predict, it causes. Even in modern science, echoes of this paradox appear. Physicists speak of the block universe theory, where past, present, and future all exist simultaneously, already fixed in space-time. In such a model, to record the future is not to predict, but to unveil what is already written. And once unveiled, it cannot be changed, because change is already accounted for in the chronicle itself. If you try to avoid it, your avoidance is part of the record. If you attempt rebellion, the rebellion is already inked into the page. Every possibility collapses into inevitability. But imagine what it would feel like, not abstractly, but in the marrow of your life. Imagine finding a record of your own future, written with the precision of detail that leaves no room for doubt. You turn the page and see not only what you will do, but the exact thoughts you will have while doing it. You scream, determined to fight it. And the scream is already there, word for word, describing how you would resist. You rip the page apart and find that the chronicle had already foretold your tearing of it, down to the trembling of your hands. How long before your will crumbles under the realization that you are not the writer, but only the ink? Some philosophers argue that such a paradox would make free will an illusion, that choice is only a mask we wear to survive the unbearable truth of predestination. Others suggest something stranger, that the chronicle is not merely passive record, but an entity itself, shaping time as a living script. Perhaps the chronicle is the true historian of the universe, writing not after the fact, but before, trapping us all inside the narrative it demands. You are not living. You are being written. There are fragments of strange accounts that brush against this nightmare. Medieval scribes swore that certain prophecies they copied into books seemed to twist reality to ensure their fulfillment, as if the act of inscription itself carried compulsion. In modern times, there are eerie stories of people finding journals with dates and entries that later unfolded exactly as described, even when they tried to resist. Were these coincidences, self-fulfilling prophecies, or glimpses into the machinery of the predestined chronicle paradox at work? The deepest horror is not that the chronicle exists, but that we may already be inside it. History itself may be the chronicle, written in the only medium large enough to hold it: reality. Every breath you take may already be inscribed, every thought already sealed. You tell yourself you are improvising, creating, choosing, but perhaps you are only performing a script whose final page has long been written, waiting for you to arrive. And yet, there is one final question. If you knew your life was written, if you knew the ending could not be changed, would you despair, or would you find freedom in surrender? For some, the paradox is a cage locking them in. For others, it is liberation, the relief of knowing that no matter what you do, you are fulfilling the only destiny possible. Perhaps the chronicle is both prison and compass, doom and comfort, law and mercy. But one thing is certain: if ever you stumble upon such a record, whether scratched on stone, written in dream, or whispered by a voice too old to belong to any living throat, you must ask yourself before you read, are you ready to carry a fate you cannot escape? For once your eyes trace the words will trace you, and the chronicle will ensure that every step you take from that moment forward walks directly into the prophecy it has already prepared. Cosmic echo recurrence. Imagine standing in a canyon so vast that your voice takes minutes to return. You call out once, a single syllable, and the walls throw it back at you, not just once, but again and again, each time softer, stretched, distorted, yet still undeniably yours. Now imagine that this canyon is not made of stone, but of time itself. Every event that happens in the universe, every birth, every death, every choice, is not a one-time occurrence. It is a sound flung into this canyon, rippling forward and back, returning again and again with subtle variations, never quite the same, never truly gone. This is the cosmic echo recurrence, the unsettling possibility that nothing in reality ever vanishes. It only repeats in endless reverberation. At first, the thought seems abstract, harmless even, but then you realize its implications. That war you read about in history, the soldiers falling, the empires crumbling, may not be sealed in the past. Its echoes may still be unfolding, repeated in forms so close they are almost indistinguishable, or in variations so subtle they slide past unnoticed. The love you felt once, the heartbreak that followed, it may ripple through other corridors of time, happening again, slightly altered, but unmistakably born of the same vibration. Life, in this view, is not a straight line, but a reverberating chamber, every act resonating endlessly. Nietzsche once spoke of the eternal recurrence, the terrifying possibility that every moment of your life will repeat infinitely. But the cosmic echo recurrence is not an exact cycle. It is variation within repetition. Like a song sampled and remixed across generations, the structure endures while the details mutate. You are not condemned to live the exact same life, but you may be condemned to live lives that rhyme with one another, their verses echoing endlessly down the canyon of time. Consider déjà vu. That eerie sensation of having lived a moment before may not be a malfunction of memory at all. It could be the faint awareness of resonance, the recognition that this moment is not the first time it has happened, but only its latest echo. You are not remembering the past. You are brushing against its recurrence. The laughter of a stranger, the glance of recognition, the twist of fate. It all vibrates with the uncanny because your soul recognizes its own reverberations. Physics, too, hints at such possibilities. Some cosmological models suggest the universe may not expand forever, but oscillate in cycles: Big Bang, expansion, collapse, then another bang, another expansion. Each universe born from the death of the last, each carrying echoes of what came before. If that is true, then history is not linear but recursive. Civilizations may rise and fall endlessly, each time with slight variations, each time leaving behind the ghost of the last. Somewhere out there, you may already have lived this exact moment, or something close enough to feel like memory. The unsettling part is how little freedom remains in such a world. If events are destined to echo, then what does choice mean? If your victories and failures ripple outward only to return, distorted but familiar, are you truly free, or are you only the resonance of decisions already made countless times before? And yet, within this, there is also hope. Because if echoes shift, if variations are possible, then change can still slip into the pattern. The canyon may repeat your voice, but each return is altered by distance, by shape, by time. Perhaps your life, too, can bend its recurrence towards something new. Think of how trauma works. A wound from childhood echoes forward, replaying in relationships, choices, fears. You encounter the same pain in different forms over and over until you find a way to break its rhythm. Or think of how joy works. A song that first moved you years ago still vibrates through your chest today, echoing with the same force though you are no longer the same person. Your life itself is already an echo chamber, replaying feelings across decades. The cosmic echo recurrence only stretches that pattern into the cosmos, suggesting that what you feel in miniature is happening on the grandest scale. But here is the strangest thought. What if the echoes grow older than the source? In a canyon, an echo can sometimes linger so long it feels independent, almost alive. What if the same is true for time? What if the echoes of events become realities in their own right, repeating even when the original has long dissolved? What if we are not the source at all, but only the echoes, living in a resonance so ancient we can no longer hear the first sound? The friend from a split earth may hear rivers flowing uphill, the keeper of locked horizons may guard forgotten worlds, but the cosmic echo recurrence reveals something more haunting, that we may never escape ourselves, that the universe itself may be a chamber where everything we do will return again and again, like voices calling endlessly in the dark. So, when you hear déjà vu whispering in your bones, when you feel the strange weight of recognition in a moment you should not know, listen carefully. It may not be coincidence. It may be your life reverberating through time, a reminder that nothing truly ends, and that you are forever part of a song you did not choose but cannot stop singing. The canyon is infinite. The echoes are eternal, and in their endless recurrence, the question remains, are you the voice, or only the echo of something long forgotten? Circular fate, architecture. There are stories whispered across cultures of roads that only pretend to stretch forward. They invite you to walk, to choose, to turn left instead of right, to leap instead of wait. But no matter how far you go, the paths arc back into themselves. This is the architecture of circular fate, where life is not a straight highway, but a spiral, where every choice, whether bold or cautious, delivers you to the same crossroads you thought you had escaped. You may feel it in the smallest patterns, the way you leave one relationship convinced you will never repeat its mistakes, only to find yourself years later staring into the same arguments, the same silences, the same coldness in another set of eyes. Or the way you switch careers, swearing this time you will not burn out. And yet the exhaustion arrives again, disguised in different colors, humming the same tune. The faces change, the scenery shifts, but the architecture underneath does not. It bends you back toward the place you were always meant to confront, Think of the myths. Oedipus flees the prophecy only to sprint directly into its jaws. Ancient sailors circle endlessly in cursed waters, no star guiding them away. Heroes march toward glory and return, bloodied, to the same village they left, their victories hollow. These stories survive not because they are entertainment, but because they are recognition. We feel them in our bones. We know what it is to struggle against a loop that will not break. I once knew a woman who spent her life running from her childhood home. She swore she would never return, that the pain was too sharp. She moved to cities oceans away, changed her name, her habits, even her accent. Yet every decade something drew her back. First a funeral, then an inheritance, then an illness. No matter what she built elsewhere, she always found herself on that same cracked porch, staring at the door she thought she had left behind. She told me once, "It's as if my life is a circle drawn with invisible ink. No matter how I trace it, it closes around me." The architecture of circular fate is not merely repetition. It is design. It is as though existence itself has built chambers where certain lessons must be learned. And until they are, you will be sent back to the same threshold. You may resist, you may detour, but the loop is patient. It does not hurry. It knows you will return. This truth terrifies because it suggests freedom is an illusion, but perhaps it is subtler than that. Perhaps the crossroads do not repeat because we are trapped, but because we are not finished. Each return offers a new vantage point. The argument you revisit is not the same if you arrive with more patience. The grief you face is not the same if your heart has grown more spacious. The work is circular, yes, but it spirals inward, each cycle cutting deeper into the core of who you are. Still, it is exhausting. To sense that your choices are elaborate costumes dressing the same skeleton. To wonder if all your striving, your desperate reinventions, are only variations of a song whose chorus cannot be escaped. And yet, there is also something eternal here. The circular path is the reason certain people keep reappearing in your life, as though bound to the same orbit. The reason certain fears never fully dissolve. The reason certain joys feel ancient, like rediscoveries rather than discoveries. Have you ever stood in a place you have never visited and felt your body sigh in recognition? Have you ever heard words for the first time, yet felt you had been waiting your entire life to hear them? These are signs of the architecture. You have been here before, and you will be here again, because this crossroads is not a mistake. It is the blueprint of your becoming. The challenge is not to escape the circle, but to walk it awake. To notice the loop not as a prison, but as a teacher. To understand that circular fate is not mocking you. It is offering you another chance, another turn, another angle from which to approach the lesson at the center. You are not meant to solve it in one pass. You are meant to return until the circle itself dissolves into meaning. So when you find yourself back where you swore you would never be, at the same decision, the same door, the same silence, pause. Do not rage at the loop. Ask instead, what am I seeing differently this time? What thread have I carried with me that was not here before? The circle may not release you yet, but it will shift. And in that shift, you may discover that the very crossroads you feared was not your cage, but your compass. In the end, perhaps fate is less an endless circle and more a spiral staircase. Repeating, yes, but rising. Each turn brings you back to the same view, but from a higher vantage point. And maybe, when you have climbed enough loops, you will finally look down and see the design. A perfect circle below, holding all the versions of yourself that once thought they were trapped, never realizing they were ascending all along. Two-sided time coin. Imagine holding a coin in your hand. One side gleams with the weight of the past, every choice, every memory, every cause that led you here. The other side shines with the promise of the future, unwritten yet waiting, every possibility pressed into its surface like invisible engravings. Now you flip it, and for one suspended instant, the coin spins. Heads and tails blur into each other. Past and future fuse. That suspended motion, that fragile shimmer in midair, is the present moment. The two-sided time coin suggests that the now is not a line between two territories, but a single object with two faces, inseparable and simultaneous. The present is not a doorway you step through from past into future. It is the coin itself, always both at once. Think about it. The past exists because memory holds it, because records insist on it, because the world is full of scars, fossils, ruins, and echoes. The future exists because expectation shapes it, because intention bends toward it, because every breath you take prepares for the next. Yet both are intangible. You cannot touch yesterday. You cannot hold tomorrow. All you can touch is the coin as it spins in your palm. This idea collapses the illusion of time's flow. If the present is the coin itself, then past and future are not destinations, but facets revealed depending on the angle of observation. When you remember, you tilt toward tails. When you anticipate, you tilt toward heads. But in truth, you never left the spinning coin. Science offers shadows of this metaphor. In physics, time symmetry suggests that many of the laws of the universe don't care about direction. Equations run just as smoothly backward as forward. The only thing that feels directional is entropy, the tendency for disorder to increase. Yet entropy too can be seen as a bias in how the coin tends to land, not proof that the other side is gone. Psychology adds another layer. When you think of your life, your mind constantly flips between recollection and projection, reliving moments gone and simulating moments to come. Neurologists have found that the brain networks for memory and imagination overlap almost completely. To imagine your future, you borrow the same circuits that recall your past. You are never only looking one way, you are always spinning the coin. And then comes the unsettling implication. If the present contains both sides, then cause and effect may not be one way. What if the future influences the present just as the past does? A decision you will make tomorrow could already be pressing faint fingerprints on your thoughts today. A moment you have yet to live could be pulling you toward it, the way the flip of a coin already holds the inevitability of landing, even while suspended. This is where the two-sided time coin bends into paradox. Perhaps free will itself is an illusion because the coin already carries both faces. Perhaps destiny is not imposed from outside, but is the geometry of the coin itself. You could not choose for it to be anything other than heads or tails. And yet, in the shimmer of the spin, in the fleeting instant when both sides blur, it feels infinite. It feels free. So here we are, each of us clutching this impossible coin. Our lives are nothing but flips, memory on one side, anticipation on the other, all compressed into the single heartbeat of now. The past is not behind you, the future not ahead. They are pressed against each other, inseparable, existing at the same instant, and the sound you hear, faint and ceaseless, is the coin spinning through eternity, never quite landing, never quite still. Dreamtime reality. Overlap. There are mornings when you wake not refreshed but unsettled because something you dreamt the night before has followed you into daylight. A phrase, an object, a face. Small enough to dismiss, yet sharp enough to disturb you. You shake your head, telling yourself it is coincidence, but the feeling does not leave, for a deeper suspicion grows in your chest. What if the dream was not a fabrication of sleep, but another branch of the same reality you now walk? What if dreams and waking are not separate at all, but two currents of one river, split only by the fragile membrane of consciousness? This is the haunting idea of dreamtime reality overlap. Imagine you dream of speaking with someone who has long been gone, and the next day, in waking life, you hear their exact words spoken by another. Or you dream of turning down a street you have never visited, only to find yourself on it weeks later, the cracks in the pavement and the flicker of a neon sign matching perfectly. These moments are easy to dismiss as tricks of the mind, but what if they are not accidents? What if your dream and your waking life are both valid timelines, both unfolding, both true, with you flickering between them depending on which state your consciousness inhabits? This would explain why dreams sometimes feel more real than reality. The weight of the air, the sharpness of detail, the raw intensity of emotion. In those moments, you are not inside a hallucination. You are inhabiting another branch of the same timeline, one where the rules are bent but still tethered to the same fabric. When you wake, you do not leave the dream behind. You only step across the seam, and sometimes the seam tears and the bleed-through occurs. Reports of this overlap are everywhere. Ancient shamans spoke of dreamtime as a sacred reality, one not separate but parallel, where ancestors and spirits walked alongside the living. Australian Aboriginal traditions describe the dreaming as the foundation of existence, a layer of truth that both created and continues to sustain the waking world. Modern psychology, though cloaked in clinical terms, brushes the same edges. Jung believed dreams were not random, but archetypal bridges, connecting waking identity to the larger unconscious. And countless ordinary people report dreams that predict, foreshadow, or entwine with waking events in ways logic struggles to explain. Science, too, holds strange possibilities. Quantum mechanics suggests reality is not fixed until observed, that multiple states can coexist until consciousness collapses them into one. What if sleep does not collapse, but expands, allowing you to inhabit other possible branches? If waking is one version of you, then dreaming may simply be another, equally real, equally alive, both stitched together in a looping dialogue across the boundaries of awareness. But what does it mean for you? If dreams bleed into waking, then your life is not confined to the daylight hours. You are living in two dimensions at once, only remembering fragments of the second when you wake. Perhaps déjà vu is not a glitch, but the memory of a dream branch resurfacing when waking, reality crosses the same path. Perhaps prophetic dreams are not prophecy at all, but the lived experience of another branch finally folding back into this one. The unsettling part is when the overlap grows too strong. There are accounts of people waking to find marks on their bodies corresponding to injuries sustained in dreams, of lovers who meet only in dreams and feel the ache of separation upon waking as though they had truly been together, of decisions made in dreams that seem to echo consequences in waking life. Each story blurs the line further until you must ask, which side is the dream and which the waking? And if both are true, then what is death? Perhaps it is not an ending, but another crossing, like sleep, an immersion into the branch we mistake for fantasy until we realize it was reality all along. Perhaps our fear of death is only the fear of not waking back into the version we call real. So, the next time you dream of something impossible, flying, speaking with the dead, stepping into a place that has no counterpart here, do not dismiss it as nonsense. Consider instead that you are living another version of your timeline, equally valid, equally yours. And when fragments of it surface in your day, the familiar street, the echoed phrase, the bleeding image, understand that it is not accident. It is dreamtime reality overlap, the reminder that your consciousness is not confined, that your life is larger than the single thread you believe yourself to be. And maybe the question is not, which one is real, but why have we been taught to believe they are separate at all? Spiral collapse of moments. Imagine standing on a staircase that was never meant to be climbed. At first it seems ordinary, each step leading neatly to the next, a straight ascent through the architecture of time. But then you notice something strange. The stairs curve inward, folding tighter and tighter, until what should be a simple climb becomes a spiral that collapses onto itself. Steps from centuries apart brush against one another, their edges almost touching. You stretch out your hand and realize you can graze the moment of your birth, while your other hand reaches toward the silence of your death. This is the spiral collapse of moments, time folding like a collapsing staircase, dragging distant eras into uncanny proximity. The unsettling part is not just the image of time collapsing, but what it means for the way we experience reality. We think of time as linear, yesterday behind us, tomorrow ahead. Yet the spiral collapse suggests that time is not a line, but a coil. Each turn of the spiral brings the past and future into dangerous closeness, as if your memories and your destinies are stacked so tightly they begin to bleed into one another. What you thought was behind you may brush against what lies ahead. And in that brushing, boundaries blur. Sometimes you feel this in dreams. A long-forgotten childhood moment surfaces as if it were only seconds ago, so vivid it drowns the present. Or you look at a stranger's face and feel you've already lived this meeting, though you know it hasn't happened yet. These are the faint tremors of the spiral collapse, times colliding, pressing against each other until echoes leak through, memory and prophecy merge, and you are left trembling between them. History itself feels like evidence of this collapse. Patterns re-emerge with uncanny similarity. Empires rise and fall in rhythms. Revolutions burn and return. Technologies spark new ages only to collapse into ruin again. Each cycle insists it is new, yet beneath its mask it is a repetition, an earlier stare brushing against the later one. Wars of conquest mirror each other across centuries. Tyrants and dreamers appear like echoes, and civilizations collapse in spirals of hunger, greed, and overreach. The staircase tightens, dragging the weight of the past dangerously close to the future. Science, too, teases at this possibility. In cosmology, some theories suggest time may not extend forever, but could bend back on itself, folding space-time like paper until distant points nearly touch. Closed time-like curves in physics hint at paths where the future loops back into the past, collapsing distinction between what was and what will be. If time is a spiral, then perhaps the past and future are not separated by distance at all, only by the thickness of the coil, and that thickness may be thinning. But what would it mean for identity? If distant moments brush together, then you are not just the person of today. You are dangerously close to every version of yourself that ever lived and ever will live. The child you were, the elder you might become, the selves you never reached, they hover against you like ghosts pressing against thin walls. Their decisions leak into your own, their emotions echo in your chest. Perhaps this explains why sometimes you feel grief for events that haven't happened yet, or nostalgia for futures you may never touch. The spiral collapse brings their weight against your skin, making the unreal feel unbearably real. There is both terror and beauty in this vision. Terror because it dissolves causality. If the future presses into the past, then what is choice? Are we doomed to repeat the same loop as the staircase tightens, circling until collapse erases the distinction altogether? But there is beauty too, because if time folds close, then nothing is truly lost. You may still brush against a childhood joy, still touch the warmth of a love long gone, still feel the breath of someone you thought you lost forever. The spiral collapse promises that everything remains, even as it presses toward dissolution. Perhaps this is why art and myth so often describe time as circular, the Ouroboros devouring its own tail, the wheel of samsara turning without end, the Mayan cycles of destruction and renewal. These are early glimpses of the spiral collapse. They are humanity's attempt to describe what it feels like when moments refuse to stay separate, when eternity is not a line stretching outward but a staircase forever folding inward. And maybe, just maybe, we already live inside it. Every déjà vu, every echoing pattern of history, every dream that feels older than memory may be the spiral brushing against itself, moments collapsing closer until you can feel both the beginning and the ending at once. To live inside such a structure is to be both ancient and newborn, both at the start and at the end of the journey. So, when you sense time bending, when you feel history repeating with uncanny familiarity, when a memory of tomorrow creeps into today, remember the spiral staircase. Remember how tightly its turns fold together, how thin the distance between then and now truly is. And know this, the collapse does not erase you. It reveals that you were never separate from the whole of time at all. You are not walking a staircase with a destination. You are part of the spiral itself, collapsing and recurring, forever touching moments that should never meet. Though temporal tidal resonance. Time is not a straight arrow, no matter how often we are taught to imagine it that way. It is not a clock face turning evenly forward, nor a road stretching endlessly into tomorrow. It is an ocean, vast and immeasurable, its tides carrying more than moments. They carry us. And within this ocean exists something few are willing to face. Temporal tidal resonance. The way past and future do not remain apart, but crash into one another like waves colliding from opposite shores. You feel it sometimes without knowing its name. A sudden heaviness in the air, as if memory itself is pressing down upon you. A sudden flicker of recognition, as if tomorrow is whispering into today. These are not illusions, they are tidal surges, moments where the cycle turns and two different times meet at the same shore, folding into your awareness like overlapping waves. Imagine walking down a street and smelling bread baking. You are pulled backward instantly, your grandmother's kitchen, her voice, the flour on her hands. But at the same time, something else pulls you forward. You glimpse a future kitchen, one you have not yet lived in, with a child laughing, with walls painted in colors you have not chosen. Both memories crash into you in the same instant, past and future tugging at your heart as if you were a buoy caught between opposing currents. You are not hallucinating. You are experiencing resonance. Cultures have long hinted at this. Ancient myths speak of time as cyclical, repeating like the turning of seasons. But this is not simple repetition. It is more like music. The ocean of time hums with frequencies, waves of years, waves of centuries, waves of entire lifetimes. When these waves align, when the rhythm of a past moment collides with the rhythm of a future one, resonance occurs. The present becomes swollen, intensified, charged with meaning, because it is not just one moment, it is two or three or infinite ones converging in your chest. I once knew a man who claimed his entire life was punctuated by these resonances. He said he would sometimes wake in the middle of the night, overwhelmed with emotions he could not explain, as though remembering something that had not yet happened. When pressed, he described these nights as tidal pulls. The past comes in one wave, the future in another, he said, and I am the shore where they crash together. Later, when major events unfolded in his life, marriages, deaths, great losses, he recognized them instantly, not because he had foreseen them, but because he had already felt them breaking inside him years before. This is the danger of temporal tidal resonance. It blurs the boundaries of what belongs to memory and what belongs to prophecy. When the ocean rises and the waves overlap, you are no longer sure if you are grieving something lost or bracing for something yet to come. The sorrow feels the same, the joy feels the same. Your body does not care about the calendar. It only knows the tide. Perhaps this explains déjà vu. Not a glitch, not a trick of the mind, but a resonance. Two waves colliding, the echo of a past action aligning perfectly with the ripple of a future one. In that shimmer, you feel the recognition of something you should not know, and yet you do. It is not because you have lived it before, but because you are standing in the surf where two timelines kiss. Science hints at this too. Physicists speak of oscillations, of particles vibrating forward and backward, of time itself, perhaps not flowing, but existing as a standing wave. If that is true, then resonance is not mystical at all. It is structural. The universe itself may be playing chords across its strings, and when one note from the past aligns with one from the future, it reverberates through us. We are not observers of the tide. We are instruments vibrating within it. But what does it mean for how we live? If your future can press backward into you, shaping your choices before they arrive, then free will is no longer as simple as we believe. Perhaps the decisions you make now are ripples sent forward, destined to become the tidal pulls that crash back upon you years later. And perhaps every kindness, every cruelty, every hesitation you allow yourself will one day surge into your life again, not as abstract consequence, but as a visceral tide. And so, resonance may not be a curse, it may be guidance. When you feel that eerie pull, when your chest tightens with a sorrow that does not belong to now, or a joy too premature for the present, listen. It may be the ocean of time giving you a signal, a warning, or a gift. It may be the future reminding you of its weight, or the past asking not to be forgotten. Either way, the tide is never meaningless. If you close your eyes tonight and listen carefully, you may even hear it. The hush of waves folding into each other, the pulse of countless lives breaking and merging on unseen shores. And in that sound, you may realize, you are not moving through time. Time is moving through you. You are the coastline against which eternity breaks, again and again, in cycles that have no beginning and no end. And so, when the resonance comes, when the past and future crash inside you and you feel lost in their spray, do not flee. Stand still. Let the waves break. Because in that resonance lies the truth of what you are. Not a traveler in time, but the shore itself, carrying both memory and prophecy, cradling both loss and promise, forever washed by the ocean that never stops returning. Identity shift recursion. Imagine looking into a mirror, not to see your face, but to see the self you are becoming. That future self gazes back at you, not passive, not waiting, but reaching across time to adjust you, reshaping your memories, rethreading your story, rewriting your past so that the person you are today is not the person you thought you were yesterday. This is the paradox of identity shift recursion. Your future self alters your past, but that altered past transforms the future self again, looping endlessly in a spiral where identity never stabilizes. It begins with something small. You remember an old event differently, not because of failing memory, but because who you are becoming needs it to be different. A success becomes a failure. A betrayal becomes a kindness. The meaning of the past warps to fit the trajectory of the future self, leaning back toward it. But then, like a stone dropped in water, this shift ripples forward. The new memory creates a new you, a slightly altered present. That altered self, in turn, peers forward to a different version of the future, and that future self again reaches back to touch the past, forcing another correction. The recursion never ends. You are both the author and the rewritten manuscript, forever editing yourself with pens handed to you by the versions of you that do not yet exist. Psychology hints at this in subtle ways. Studies of memory reveal that every recollection is a reconstruction, not a replay. Each time you remember, you rewrite the memory to align with the person you are now. If identity is built on memory and memory itself is plastic, then your self is a recursive loop, past feeding into present, present into future, future into past. The self is less a stable figure and more a Mobius strip, folding endlessly upon itself. Philosophy sharpens the paradox. If your future self changes your past, then who you are becomes dependent on a self that does not yet exist. Identity is no longer anchored in history, but suspended in recursion, like a loop of film with no first frame. Where does you begin? In the child you were, in the adult you will become, or in the infinite relay between them, endlessly rewriting, endlessly being rewritten? Even physics offers an eerie resonance. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics allow for retrocausality, effects shaping causes, futures influencing pasts. In such a framework, identity itself becomes a wave bouncing between what has been and what will be, collapsing into something different each time you observe yourself. The haunting part is this. In the recursion, there is no final, true you. Every attempt to fix who you are becomes undone by the future self who refuses to stop editing. You are always in draft, never in final copy. Your identity is not a noun but a verb, not a state, but a recursive process, spiraling without end. And maybe that is the deeper truth. We long for stability, for a solid definition of who we are. But perhaps to be human is to exist inside this recursion, to accept that we are never one person, but an infinite echo of selves, each one reaching backward and forward to shape the others. The terror of endless identity shift is also its beauty. You are not locked into what you were, and you are not condemned to what you will be. You are the recursive dance itself, endless, unstable, alive. Starlight time misdirection. Imagine this: a star, light years away, sends out its glow across the abyss of space. We look up with our telescopes, trusting what we see as a message from the past, a clean window into history. Yet, what if that light does not arrive in the order it was born? What if the photons that should tell us of a star's infancy instead show us its death, or a future that the star itself has not yet lived? This is the unsettling idea of starlight time misdirection, light arriving out of sequence, revealing a history that never happened, or a future that cannot be. Light is our only messenger across the void. We cannot touch distant stars. We cannot travel to them within a human lifetime. What we know comes only through photons, carrying their imprint across impossible distances. And yet, physics tells us that time is not always obedient. Gravity bends it. Motion stretches it. Black holes can twist it into loops. If the path of starlight can be distorted, then the sequence in which we receive that light might not match the sequence in which it was born. Imagine watching a movie where the scenes are shuffled. First you see the ending, then a middle scene, then the beginning, and yet you believe you are watching a continuous story. That is how the cosmos could be fooling us. There are real examples that hint at this. In 2016, astronomers recorded a bizarre signal from a star that seemed to flicker in ways that made no sense, dimming by 20%, then 40%, as if whole portions of its structure had disappeared. For years, debates raged. Was it alien megastructures, dust clouds, or something stranger, like light being bent through warped space-time, so that we were seeing events out of order? What if we were witnessing a stellar collapse that hadn't yet occurred, or had occurred centuries ago, but whose photons were tangled in a gravitational mirage? Gravitational lensing already proves this is possible. When light from a distant quasar bends around a massive galaxy, it can take multiple paths to reach us. One ray may travel the shorter route, another the longer, so we see the same explosion twice, once today, and again years later. Astronomers have documented such echoes of the cosmos, supernovae replaying like cosmic reruns, but these are only the simplest cases. What if extreme conditions, near black holes or warped space-time geometries, do not just delay light, but reorder it, You could see the death of a star before its birth, or a pulse of radiation that seems to come from tomorrow. Think of how unsettling this is. Our calendars are built on trust in sequence. Yesterday leads to today to tomorrow. But the universe does not guarantee this neat unfolding. Quantum mechanics adds another layer. Photons do not behave like obedient messengers, but like gamblers at a cosmic casino, carrying probabilities instead of certainties. In rare circumstances, their arrival times could defy our linear expectations. To an observer on Earth, that might mean witnessing an event that logically should not yet have occurred. A flare from a star that hasn't yet flared. A collapse that predates the collapse. This challenges not just astronomy, but philosophy. What is history if our only records, light waves, can lie to us? A distant civilization looking at Earth right now may see the dinosaurs roaming, or perhaps cities not yet built. They may see our extinction long before we live it. To them, our story would be scrambled, stitched together from light that does not respect our timeline. And perhaps the same is true for what we see in the night sky. The Milky Way's grand band may be a rearranged memory, fragments of a sequence that never truly existed. Consider the psychological weight of this idea. We are creatures desperate for order, building cause and effect as the skeleton of our existence. But the universe whispers something else, that time is not a straight arrow, but a tangle of threads, some looping forward, some backward, some overlapping in paradoxical spirals. When we gaze at starlight, we may not just be looking into the past, we may be staring at the ghost of a future that is undecided, or a false memory of a cosmos that never was. Even the most advanced models of space-time allow for closed, time-like curves, paths where light or matter can double back and arrive before it departed. Physicists call them exotic, but they are not forbidden. Near a rotating black hole, the Kerr solution suggests light could travel in circles through time itself. In that environment, a photon could leave a star, whirl through warped geometry, and arrive at our telescopes, presenting a scene from its own future. To us, it would look like a prophecy etched in light. Yet, when astronomers go to check it centuries later, reality might refuse to match what was foretold. The eerie part is this: we would never know. Because we cannot leave Earth fast enough to confirm, we can only trust the order in which light arrives. If the cosmos chooses to shuffle the deck, we mistake illusion for truth. History, then, becomes fragile, provisional, an arrangement of signals that may hide as much as they reveal. And so, when you step outside tonight and see the stars, remember this: you are not gazing at certainties, but at a theater of possibilities. That star may have died long ago, or it may not yet have lived the story you are witnessing. You could be looking at a future light has brought to you prematurely, or at a past that never truly was. In the silence of the night sky, the universe performs its oldest trick, showing you a film whose scenes are shuffled and daring you to believe that the story is still in order. Because perhaps time itself is not a river flowing one way, but a hall of mirrors. Light bounces, delays, accelerates, reorders. The truth of the cosmos might not be linear, but recursive, fractured, endlessly misdirected. And we, staring at the stars, are the audience of this misdirection, entranced, confused, but unable to look away. Event horizon reflection. There is a place in the universe where the laws of time do not merely bend, but collapse into something unrecognizable. A place where the flow of seconds becomes so distorted that the very idea of before and after begins to lose its meaning. That place is the event horizon of a black hole, the invisible boundary beyond which nothing, not even light, can escape. And yet, the strangest part is not the darkness that lies beyond, but what happens at its edge. As you approach it, time itself folds so completely that moments begin to mirror one another, reflecting forward and backward at once, as if reality were trapped between two mirrors facing each other. This is the phenomenon we might call the event horizon reflection. Imagine drawing closer to such a gravitational abyss. To an outside observer, you slow, then freeze, suspended at the horizon, your last instant stretched across eternity. But from your perspective, time still flows. You move forward. You breathe. You watch. And yet, there is a fracture in the sequence. The moments ahead of you begin to ripple back toward you, inverted, like echoes reversing through the fabric of causality. You see yourself not only approaching the horizon, but retreating from it at the same time. Every step forward carries its shadow, its mirror image walking backward, returning into the past you thought you had already left behind. Physics already hints at this. Near an event horizon, time dilates infinitely. To cross that threshold is to stretch a moment into forever. Some theories suggest that the horizon does not just slow time, but folds it into strange symmetries. Just as light bends, so too may causality itself bend back upon itself, producing the uncanny sensation of events replaying in reverse. It is not fantasy. It is mathematics written into the geometry of space-time. Now, imagine what it feels like. You reach out your hand, and as you do, you see its reflection closing back into itself, the gesture already undone. You speak, and your words echo backward into silence before you finish them. You do not simply move through time, you move against it, both directions stitched into the same instant. The boundary between memory and prophecy dissolves. To remember becomes to predict. To act becomes to undo. You are no longer a traveler in time, but its mirror, caught in a feedback loop of reflection. There are strange echoes of this concept in human thought. Mystics and poets across ages have described visions of time folding in upon itself, moments replaying as if history were a reflection. Ancient Hindu cosmology speaks of kalpas, cycles of creation and destruction where the end mirrors the beginning. Some medieval theologians speculated that eternity was not infinite extension, but perfect reflection. Every moment folded into itself so fully that all times became one. Even in modern culture, near-death experiences sometimes describe life reviews, where every action is experienced forward and backward at once, the living of a choice and the feeling of its consequence collapsing into a single reflection. But the event horizon adds a harsher edge. It is not metaphor, but mechanism. The gravitational pull is so absolute that even information itself bends. The sequence of reality cannot maintain its ordinary order. Every cause carries its effect not after, but beside, and every effect trails its cause backward into symmetry. It is not time travel, not in the sense of leaving one point for another. It is time mirroring, the collapse of linearity into a single recursive instant. And here is the darker implication. If the universe itself contains such mirrors, then what does that say about our own experience of time? Might we already be living within subtle horizons, places where causality loops, where reflection occurs without our noticing? Déjà vu may not be psychological trickery, but the faint ripple of mirrored time, a brief glimpse of an event, replaying in reverse as you live it forward. Premonitions may not be mystical visions, but bleed through from the mirrored side of a timeline already folded back on itself. To stand at the event horizon is to lose the distinction between moving and remembering, between choosing and repeating. It is to confront a truth almost unbearable, that time may not be a line at all, but a mirror hall, reflections folding in both directions until past and future are indistinguishable. So what becomes of you if you step through? Perhaps you fall into silence, into the singularity where all reflections collapse into one. Or perhaps you are scattered across the horizon, your life stretched into infinite symmetries, your every breath mirrored in reverse, until you no longer know which direction is yours. And maybe this is not just the fate of stars, but of all things. Perhaps death itself is an event horizon, the edge where time folds and moments mirror, where your last instant is reflected forever into both directions. To die may be to become your own reflection, living every choice backward and forward in an eternal loop. The event horizon. Reflection is not simply the physics of gravity, it is the poetry of inevitability. A reminder that the closer we come to truth, the more it bends, and the more we realize that time itself is a fragile illusion, waiting for the black mirror of the cosmos to expose its hidden symmetry. Puzzle piece. Time loss. Imagine looking at time not as a flowing river, but as a jigsaw puzzle spread across an endless table. Each piece fits together, building a coherent picture. Births leading to choices, choices leading to revolutions, revolutions leading to the world you stand in now. But then you notice gaps. Key pieces are gone. You lean closer, and the missing shapes are not empty, but blurred, impossible to grasp. Yet here is the unsettling part. The image still continues beyond the gaps. The consequences remain even though the events that caused them have vanished. This is the puzzle piece time loss, a phenomenon where history erases its own anchors, leaving behind effects without causes, consequences without origins. You already feel traces of it in memory. You remember how a scar appeared on your body, but the incident that caused it refuses to surface. You live inside a habit, but cannot recall when you first learned it. Entire friendships blur at the edges. You know they shaped you, you feel their weight, but the actual moments are gone, like puzzle pieces lost under the floorboards. The result is not blankness, but distortion. You live in the echo of causes you cannot name. Now, extend this beyond the personal into the scale of civilizations. Historians stumble across ruins of vast empires, but cannot explain how they collapsed. Languages appear fully formed in the archaeological record with no trace of their roots. Whole cultures vanish, leaving behind monuments that make no sense without their missing origin stories. The puzzle piece. Time loss is not just an individual forgetting, it is the universe forgetting itself. Events vanish from the puzzle, yet their ripple effects still govern everything that follows. Philosophers call this the problem of missing causes. If you find a footprint in the sand, but no one walked there, did the footprint arrive from an erased event? If a law shapes your society, but the document that birthed it is gone, then the structure remains without the seed that grew it. This paradox rattles the very core of causality, because if the past can lose its pieces yet still generate effects, what does that say about the stability of the present? How much of what we take as real is built on absences we will never recover? Think about déjà vu again, not as a neurological hiccup, but as a symptom. Perhaps you feel you've lived a moment before because you have, but the original occurrence has been excised from history, erased like a stolen puzzle piece. What remains is the ripple, the consequence embedded in your bones, forcing you to recognize the hollow outline of a missing cause. Science itself grapples with this in disturbing ways. In quantum mechanics, particles sometimes behave as though influenced by events that have not yet happened, or by interactions that no longer exist. The effect survives, but the cause seems to vanish into nothingness. The puzzle piece. Time loss is this principle scaled to human experience. Outcomes without origins, patterns without beginnings. There is terror here, yes, but also revelation. Because if time can lose pieces and still continue, then perhaps origin is not as important as we think. Perhaps existence is stitched more by consequence than by cause. We imagine our lives as chains of beginnings, birthdays, first loves, first losses. But maybe what defines us most are the absences, the events we cannot recall, but which still sculpt our present selves. Consider grief. Sometimes you ache for someone, but the exact memories of them grow faint. You can't recall their voice, the details of their face, the moments you shared. Yet the grief remains sharp, undeniable. The cause dissolves, but the consequence endures. This is personal puzzle piece time loss, proof that even when the memory vanishes, the imprint remains. And yet, there is something liberating in this vision, because if the missing pieces do not erase the whole puzzle, then maybe we do not need perfect continuity to remain real. Maybe we are not defined by the stories we can fully recount, but by the spaces between them. The gaps are not failures. They are reminders that reality itself is incomplete, always missing something, always stitched from fragments. The question that remains is unsettling. What else has already been lost? What revolutions, what inventions, what loves, what betrayals were erased from the puzzle, leaving behind only their shadows? And if time itself can discard its pieces yet continue functioning, how can we ever know whether the ground beneath us is solid or hollowed out by absence? The puzzle piece. Time loss leaves us with a haunting truth. We may never see the full picture. We may live forever inside a puzzle with missing pieces, forced to navigate consequences whose origins we cannot name. But perhaps the very act of searching for what is gone, the leaning closer, the attempt to fill the gaps with imagination, is what makes us human. For in the silence of absence, in the ache of the missing, we become not just witnesses to time, but participants in its unfinished design. Timeline fork contraction. There are nights when you lie awake, turning over the endless possibilities of your life. What if I had spoken instead of staying silent? What if I had stayed instead of leaving? What if I had turned left instead of right? Each question opens another road, another life you imagine running parallel to your own, branching infinitely into futures you will never touch. It is comforting, in a way, to believe that possibility is limitless, that every choice spawns a universe, that somewhere another version of you is carrying the life you lost. But then comes the shattering revelation of timeline fork contraction. The moment when all those infinite futures you thought existed fold inward, collapsing into one single outcome. Every branch, every fork, every imagined escape is absorbed, devoured, and funneled into inevitability. You realize, with a kind of cold clarity, that there was only ever going to be this one road, this one moment, this one you. It does not arrive gently. It strikes like the snapping of a taut string. One day you are dreaming of countless versions of yourself. The next, you feel the invisible hands of reality corralling you, narrowing the path, stripping away the illusions of freedom. The relationship you thought might go in 10 directions ends only one way. The illness you prayed would diverge into healing, and survival ends in its singular conclusion. The war you thought might be averted arrives on schedule, and you, standing at the crossroads, realize there never was a choice. There was only the shadow of choice, a theater of freedom masking the stage set of inevitability. I once spoke to a man who had lived his entire life under the belief that he had outsmarted fate. He survived accidents by mere seconds, dodged illnesses by the luck of timing, avoided disasters by changing plans at the last minute. He was convinced his alertness, his constant vigilance, kept him free. But when his life finally broke into tragedy, he admitted through tears that every escape had only been another step toward the same destination. "I thought I was weaving through the branches," he said, "but the branches were always bending back toward the trunk. That is the essence of contraction, the collapse of infinity into singularity. The hundreds of possible forks you imagine are not discarded. They are consumed, folded, compressed into the single outcome that arrives, as though the universe swallows its drafts and hands you only the final script. This realization haunts because it undermines the story we tell ourselves about freedom. We believe in possibility as oxygen. We survive heartbreak by saying, it could have been different. We endure failure by believing in another chance, another fork. But contraction strips away the comfort. It whispers, no, it could only ever have been this. Every turn you imagined was an illusion because the end was waiting, and nothing you did could dislodge it. And yet, within the cruelty lies something strange. Contraction reveals that all your choices, even the ones you regret, even the ones you thought meaningless, were not wasted. They were strands feeding into the same braid, rivers converging into the same sea. The infinite was never outside you. It was always being pulled inward, shaping the inevitability you stand inside now. Perhaps this is why certain moments feel so heavy, so saturated with meaning, as though all of time is pressing into them. A final conversation, a sudden decision, a quiet turning of a doorknob. In those moments, you are not just yourself. You are every version of yourself that ever might have been, collapsing into one. Every path not taken folds into your footsteps. Every choice absorbed into the singularity of now. That is why you tremble. That is why the air feels thicker. You are standing at the point where infinity dies into certainty. But what if inevitability is not punishment? What if it is revelation? To realize that every path, no matter how scattered, still leads you here, may not mean freedom is gone. It may mean that freedom was never about escaping endings. It was about shaping how you arrive at them. The outcome may be fixed, but the person who steps into it is not. Every fork, every detour, every illusion of choice still mattered. Not because it altered the ending, but because it altered you. In this way, timeline fork contraction is not simply the death of possibility, but its transformation. The infinite does not vanish. It is distilled into a single essence. Every potential you ever carried is absorbed into the person you have become, and though the outcome cannot be changed, the meaning of that outcome depends entirely on the version of you who meets it. So the next time you feel the branches closing, the paths folding inward, do not panic. You are not being robbed. You are being delivered. The inevitability you face is not emptiness. It is the convergence of everything you have been, everything you might have been, and everything you will never be. The illusion of endless roads has ended, but the weight of all those roads remains within you. And when you step into the singular outcome, whether it is joy or sorrow, triumph or loss, step knowing that you are not just one self meeting it. You are the sum of every fork, every shadow, every possible life collapsing into this moment. And in that convergence, inevitability does not feel like theft. It feels like eternity finding its final shape in you. Extinguished future revival. Imagine standing in a hallway of doors. You walk past one, hear it slam behind you, and feel the lock click shut. That future is gone, extinguished. The chance to live it has collapsed, erased from possibility. You accept this as permanent. Yet then, impossibly, you return to that hallway, and the locked door is open again. Not only open, but the path beyond it looks as though it had always been there, as though it were never shut in the first place. This is the paradox of extinguished future revival. A future erased from existence suddenly reappears, rewriting history as though it had always been inevitable. We know the fragility of futures. A decision not taken, a word unsaid, a moment missed. All of them extinguish branches of possibility. You don't marry the person you never spoke to. You don't become the artist if you never touched the brush. You don't survive if the doctor never arrives. Once erased, these futures feel final, swallowed by the abyss of what could have been. But the revival comes when reality bends. A missed opportunity returns in disguise. A person you thought gone forever re-enters your life, and suddenly the narrative reshapes as if their presence was always woven into your story. A disaster you thought was avoided roars back decades later, rewritten into the timeline as if it had been building all along. What's more unsettling is how seamlessly the human mind accepts it, retroactively rewriting the past so that this revived future feels inevitable, not miraculous. Psychology shows this tendency in memory. Humans unconsciously edit their recollections to maintain coherence. When something unexpected happens, we often look back and see the signs we once missed, convincing ourselves that it was always going to happen. This is not prophecy. It is the mind's desperate attempt to stitch continuity. The extinguished future is revived, and history is rewritten to claim it was always waiting. Science, too, whispers echoes of this paradox. In quantum theory, when a wave function collapses, all but one possibility vanish. But in some interpretations, those erased outcomes are not gone. They linger, hidden, until conditions allow them to reemerge. Even in cosmology, cycles of destruction and rebirth, universes dying only to restart with new conditions, mirror this haunting idea. What was extinguished can be revived, not as a return, but as a rewriting of inevitability itself. And on a personal scale, think of the futures you swore were gone, the dream you buried, but somehow stumble back into years later, the relationship that collapsed, but reignites in a way that feels fated, the second chance that should not exist, but does. Each time, the past subtly shifts in your mind. You tell yourself you were always meant to return here, though yesterday you would have called it impossible. This paradox unsettles because it questions the permanence of erasure. If futures can be revived and then written into the story as inevitabilities, then what does it mean for free will? Did you ever lose them, or were they always waiting? Was the lock on the door real, or just an illusion of timing? Perhaps the deepest implication is this. Time itself may not be linear erasure, but cyclical recursion. Futures may not vanish, but hover, waiting for the moment when the universe breathes them back into being. And when they return, they do not feel foreign. They feel inevitable, as though they were simply hidden until you were ready to step through the door. The extinguished future revival is not only about time, it is about identity, memory, and fate. It suggests that what is gone may not be gone, and what returns may reshape your story so completely that you cannot remember a world without it. The terror and the beauty is the same. The future you thought you killed may one day return, and when it does, you may believe it was always yours. Reverse arrow paradox. The reverse arrow paradox is one of the most disorienting ideas the mind can encounter. Imagine living in a world where the direction of time is not forward, but backward, where the effect always comes before the cause. A glass sits shattered on the floor, and only afterwards do you watch it leap up, reform, and return to the hand that dropped it. A candle is extinguished, and only later do you see the flame burning, the wax rebuilding itself into smooth perfection, the match unstriking. In such a world, shadows would not follow bodies. Bodies would chase their shadows. The present would not give birth to the future. It would chase it desperately, like an echo returning to a sound that has not yet been made. Physics hints at the possibility in strange ways. The fundamental laws that govern particles, electromagnetism, quantum mechanics, relativity, are largely time-symmetric. They do not care whether you run them forward or backward. The equations work just the same. It is only entropy, the steady drift toward disorder, that gives time its apparent arrow. But what if entropy itself reversed? What if, under certain conditions of space-time, order increased instead of decaying? You would not grow older. You would unage. You would grow younger, your memories fading as they dissolve into unborn moments, until one day you ceased not in death, but in infancy, a life lived backwards, yet still felt forwards. Consider what this does to meaning. If the effect comes before the cause, then intent becomes impossible. You do not drink water because you are thirsty. Your thirst would arise only because you had already drunk. You would not speak because you had something to say. Words would emerge first, and only later would the thought behind them bloom. A conversation becomes two shadows speaking to each other without bodies. A story becomes unreadable because its ending insists on happening before its beginning. And yet, within this inverted current, there is still a strange kind of logic. The reverse arrow does not eliminate connection. It merely twists it inside out. This brings us to the cyclic prophecy trap. Imagine a prediction of the future that comes true only because you knew it in advance. You hear a prophecy that you will betray a friend. The knowledge terrifies you, and you twist yourself in knots to avoid it. Yet, in your attempts to escape, your fear drives you into suspicion, into distance, into anger, and you betray them, just as foretold. Now reverse the arrow. The betrayal comes first, echoing backwards into time, and the prophecy emerges not as foresight, but as an aftershock. You were always trapped, not by the future, but by the loop that made effect and cause collapse into each other. The cycle feeds itself endlessly, an Ouroboros of time. In this paradox, the universe becomes a mirror house where no door truly leads forward. Every effect casts a shadow into the past, and every cause rises from that shadow, like smoke curling back into the match. We are so used to thinking of time as a straight path. But what if it is instead a trap that folds inward? What if our choices are merely effects, chasing causes we have not yet lived? The reverse arrow asks us to consider that perhaps we are not walking into tomorrow at all. Perhaps tomorrow is pulling us into itself, while yesterday waits quietly, manufactured in the wake of our passing. Cyclic prophecy, a trap. There is a kind of prophecy that does not merely predict the future, it creates it. At first glance, it seems like destiny, a glimpse into what must inevitably unfold. But when you look closer, you realize the prophecy has no independent origin. It exists only because of the actions it inspired, and those actions only happened because the prophecy was spoken. An Ouroboros of cause and effect, biting its own tail. This is the cyclic prophecy trap. A loop where prediction and fulfillment are indistinguishable, where history itself is caught in a snare of self-creation. Imagine being told that one day you will betray your closest friend. The words linger in you like poison. You try to resist them, avoid them, reshape your life so the betrayal never occurs. But every choice you make in that resistance, the suspicion, the guarded words, the quiet distancing, creates the very fracture that ensures the betrayal will come. You did not fulfill the prophecy because it was true. It was true only because you tried to resist it. And when the day arrives, you realize the paradox. Without the prophecy, the betrayal would never have happened. This is the trap, a future that does not exist independently, but feeds entirely on its own prediction. The prophecy is not a vision of destiny. It is a closed loop, like a mirror reflecting itself forever, a story without beginning. Which came first, the event or the prophecy? Neither. Both exist only in relation to each other, locked in circular dependence. History and myth are riddled with echoes of this paradox. The Oracle of Delphi told King Laius that his son would kill him. In fear, he abandoned the child, who grew up to be Oedipus, the very man who struck down his father without knowing it. Had the prophecy never been spoken, the chain of actions leading to it may never have unfolded. In Norse legend, the gods' desperate attempts to prevent Ragnarok, the doom foretold, are precisely what ensure it arrives. Even modern folklore carries the same thread. Warnings of disaster become the spark that ignites it. Predictions of failure cause the collapse they sought to prevent. Psychology has a name for a gentler version of this phenomenon, the self-fulfilling prophecy. Teachers who expect failure from students inadvertently create the environment in which the students fail. Societies that believe collapse is inevitable make choices that accelerate collapse. But The cyclic prophecy trap is darker than this. It does not merely influence, it annihilates the possibility of an outside truth. The prophecy does not reveal the future, it fabricates it, then disguises its fabrication as inevitability. The terrifying implication is that we may already live inside such loops. Consider history's revolutions and wars, each justified by the conviction that conflict was inevitable. Consider how often warnings of betrayal, corruption, or collapse become scripts followed subconsciously by those who hear them. At what point does a narrative stop being prediction and start being architecture? At what point are we not reading the future, but writing it by believing in it? And what of free will? If your choices are shaped by knowledge of the prophecy, can you claim those choices as your own? Or are you simply the vessel through which the prophecy ensures its survival? The loop ensures you cannot step outside of it. If you defy the prediction, that defiance becomes its fulfillment. If you obey, it fulfills itself more directly. Either way, you are caught. There are stories of people who tried to break the loop by refusing to act at all, by paralyzing themselves with inaction. Yet even that inaction often becomes the key to fulfillment. A ruler warned he would die in battle refuses to fight, only to die of unrest or revolt born from his cowardice. A lover told they will abandon their beloved chooses silence, only to lose them by neglect. The trap has no edge to escape, because escape itself is part of the prophecy's design. Perhaps this is why prophecies are feared rather than celebrated. They carry not just knowledge, but contagion. To hear one is to risk becoming its agent, to live inside its loop. And maybe this is not restricted to myth. Maybe every belief about the future, every conviction about who you will become, who you cannot become, is a kind of prophecy. Maybe you are already caught in loops of your own making, living futures not because they were destined, but because you believed in them enough to trap yourself inside. So when you hear the voice of prophecy, whether in ancient text, whispered warning, or the quiet voice of your own expectation, ask yourself, is this future true, or is it only true because I believe it? And if you cannot tell the difference, you may already be ensnared in the cyclic prophecy trap, where past and future spiral endlessly into each other, and your every step forward is only another turn in the circle. Dual reality, overlap. Sometimes reality feels too heavy, too precise, too certain in its unfolding, but then comes the fracture, the shimmer, the vertigo, when two versions of the same moment arrive together, layered like ghost images on a screen. This is the riddle of dual reality overlap. When the universe refuses to choose, when both truths stand side by side, mutually exclusive yet undeniably real, it begins quietly. You reach for a glass and hear it fall, shattering against the floor. But in the same breath, you also feel its cool weight still in your hand. The sensation is not confusion, it is certainty doubled. Two paths braided into one heartbeat. The floor glitters with shards, and the glass rests unharmed in your palm. Both versions exist, overlapping, humming against each other in impossible harmony. Some dismiss this as memory error, as if the brain simply fumbled the moment. But the feeling that takes root inside you is far stranger, far deeper. Because you know you didn't imagine it. You lived both. You stood at the crossroads of time, and the road did not split. It folded. I once spoke with a woman who swore she carried such a fracture in her bones. She described the night of her father's death. She was in his hospital room when the monitor flatlined, when the nurses rushed in, when her hands went cold against his cooling skin. She remembers leaving the room broken. And yet, she also remembers a second version, where the monitor steadied, where he lived another week, where they shared one last conversation about forgiveness. Both versions live inside her with equal weight. When I asked how she reconciled them, she shook her head. I don't. I carry them both because both are true. This is the impossible architecture of dual realities. Neither cancels the other, neither dominates, yet both cannot logically exist. It is not illusion, it is resonance. Two chords played at once, dissonant and yet inseparable. Perhaps déjà vu itself is only a diluted version of this. That eerie jolt of familiarity, when you know the scene unfolding before you, is both new and remembered. Perhaps what you are really sensing in that instant is not the past echoing forward, but two versions of now colliding. One where you have lived this before, one where you have not. And the overlap briefly reveals itself. Science hints at this in the language of quantum paradox. A particle here and there, spinning both ways, existing in two states until observed. Schrödinger's cat, alive and dead, not metaphor, but blueprint. Dual reality is not a myth. It is woven into the physics of existence. The strange thing is not that we occasionally experience overlap. The strange thing is that we do not experience it constantly. And yet, when you do, it leaves you changed. Because it whispers something frightening. Maybe the universe does not require consistency. Maybe contradictions are not errors, but foundations. Maybe truth itself is not singular, but plural, infinite, simultaneous. What does that mean for you? It means that every certainty you cling to, the belief that your choices seal one story and silence the others, may be wrong. Both stories may survive. Both may be happening now. But if that is true, what does it make of responsibility? If in one version you said the words and in another you did not, if in one version you saved them and in another you failed, then who are you? The overlap does not give answers. It leaves you trembling with the paradox that you are both, that you are the harmony and the dissonance together. A friend once described an experience of narrowly avoiding a car accident. He slammed the brakes, swerved, and the vehicle stopped just short of collision. Relief washed over him, and yet, for weeks after, he dreamt of the crash, the metal bending, the glass exploding, his body flung sideways. He woke with the bruises, phantom but aching. He began to wonder if it had happened, if he was living inside the spared version, while another him carried the wreck. He was not haunted by trauma, but by certainty, that both were real, and somehow he had not chosen between them. This is the weight of dual reality overlap. It dismantles the fragile comfort of a single timeline. You are forced to accept that your life may not be one clean story, but a layered palimpsest, one truth shining faintly beneath another, each bleeding through. And the moments you think of as fixed may be trembling beneath the pressure of their opposites. So what are we to do? Perhaps the answer is not to reconcile, but to witness, to let the contradictions sit beside each other, to hold the glass in your hand while acknowledging the shards on the floor, to mourn the father who died and cherish the father who lived that extra week, to recognize that your life is not only the version you walk, but also the versions that shadow it, shaping you in silence. When the overlap comes again, and it will, don't run from it. Let yourself feel the strange harmony, the doubling, the impossibility of living two truths at once. It is not a glitch. It is the universe reminding you that reality is larger than logic, and that somewhere in its hidden architecture, contradiction is not failure, it is design. And when you breathe again, when the overlap fades, and the world resumes its singular rhythm, you will know something that others do not. That truth is never one thread. It is a braid, and you are the loom upon which impossible strands are woven, again and again, into the mystery of what it means to exist. Chronomask identity. Slit. Imagine walking into a room and feeling, without seeing, that you are not alone. The air trembles with a presence that is familiar yet unreachable. You turn, expecting a stranger, but what you sense instead is yourself. Not a reflection in a mirror, not a double-stitched from chance resemblance, but another you, born of the same thread of existence, standing in the same moment, separated by the thinnest veil of time. One version shaped by the echoes of your past actions, another molded by the gravity of your future choices. They exist side by side, layered upon each other like masks, yet they never meet. This is the chronomask identity split, a fracture in selfhood where the past and future you coexist, invisible to one another, both equally real. The paradox is dizzying because identity has always felt singular. You believe you are one person, a continuity stretched across time, a single flame carried from yesterday into tomorrow. But what if that flame is already split? What if every decision you made in the past crystallized into a version of you that still breathes somewhere in the present, and every choice you will make in the future radiates backward, shaping another version that also inhabits now? Both exist, but like parallel frequencies, they cannot touch. You are not one flame, but two masks worn in the same moment, blind to each other's gaze. You may have felt this without naming it. The sudden heaviness when memory grips you, not just recalling who you were, but being that person again for a flicker, as if they were still alive within you. or the uncanny certainty of anticipation when you feel pulled forward by the weight of a decision not yet made, as though some future self has already stepped into being and is tugging you toward them. In those moments, the chronomask becomes perceptible, the past you and the future you brushing against one another in the same instant, unaware of their overlap, yet shaping the ground you stand on. Philosophers have wrestled with versions of this split for centuries. Augustine wrote of the present of the past, the present of the present, and the present of the future, 3 layers of time coexisting in a single moment. Modern physics sharpens the blade further. In some interpretations of quantum theory, every possible outcome exists simultaneously, with past and future states entangled. The chronomask is not fantasy, but an allegory for how reality itself may be structured. Selves proliferating, overlapping, yet partitioned by the boundaries of causality. Consider how this plays out in daily life. The choices of your past self, the betrayals, the triumphs, the hesitations, echo into your present as habits, scars, reflexes. That past self is alive in you, steering you invisibly, even though you cannot meet them face to face. At the same time, your future self, shaped by the choices you will make tomorrow, a week, a decade from now, is already pressing upon you. Their voice whispers in your fears, their presence bends your hopes. These 2 selves coexist, present in the same moment, yet never speaking. You are both pulled backward and forward, a split mask of identity that never resolves into one face. The emotional weight of this is immense, because if both versions are real, then who are you right now? Are you the product of your past, unable to escape the grip of what has already been done? Or are you the seed of your future, destined to grow into someone you can barely imagine? The chronomask identity split refuses to let you choose. You are both, always both, existing in a collision of timelines where the past and future selves haunt the present without ever meeting. This paradox unsettles because it mirrors something we already feel. Think of regret. You ache not just because of what you did, but because a version of you still is doing it, lingering in the corridors of your memory, alive and irretrievable. Think of longing. You are moved not only by what you hope for, but because a version of you has already lived it in imagination, haunting you with a future that feels older than the present. These are not just emotions. They are fractures of selfhood, the places where the masks slip and you glimpse the other version of you, hovering just beyond reach. But perhaps this split is not a curse. Perhaps it is a form of expansion. To wear 2 masks at once is to be stretched across a larger canvas of time, to exist in more than one version of yourself simultaneously. The past self gives you depth. The future self gives you direction. Though they never meet, you are their meeting ground, the fragile point of overlap where yesterday and tomorrow converge. The danger, of course, is imbalance. If you lean too heavily into the past self, you live in nostalgia, chained to ghosts of what has already burned. If you lean too far into the future self, you dissolve into anxiety, living only for what is not yet real. The paradox demands equilibrium, to recognize that you are haunted by both without belonging entirely to either. The present is not a bridge, but a mask itself, stitched from faces that never meet. Yet both are undeniably yours. So, the next time you feel torn between who you were and who you are becoming, imagine the chronomask. Imagine the 2 selves brushing silently past each other, one carrying the weight of all you've done, the other holding the promise of what you will become. Neither can see the other, but you, standing here, are the collision of both. And maybe the truth is this. Identity was never singular. You were always more than one. You were always the split, the paradox, the impossible mask worn by time itself. Signal from tomorrow, a message arrives. No sound, no sender, only a flicker. Words etched on a screen, a signal buzzing through static, a whisper carried on the edge of probability. It claims to be from tomorrow, not next year, not a century hence, just tomorrow. And what it tells you is simple, almost ordinary. A warning, a piece of advice, a set of instructions. You follow it, perhaps reluctantly, perhaps with curiosity. And then, as the day unfolds, everything aligns exactly as the signal predicted. The paradox becomes clear. The message could only exist because you acted on it, but you could only act on it because the message already existed. This is the riddle of the signal from tomorrow. At first glance, it feels like science fiction. time travel wrapped in cables and radio waves. But the deeper you look, the more unnervingly logical it becomes. If time is not a straight line but a loop, then the act of receiving a message from the future does not break causality. It completes it. The signal exists because the events happened. The events happened because the signal arrived. Each side folds into the other until beginning and end blur into a single closed circuit. Physics teases us with the possibility. In 1940, mathematician Kurt Gödel proposed solutions to Einstein's equations that allowed for closed time-like curves, paths through space-time where information could travel backward. Quantum experiments suggest particles can influence each other retroactively, their states entangled not just across distance, but across time. In theory, a signal from the future might not violate physics at all. It may simply be the universe whispering to itself. But the psychological weight is heavier. Imagine receiving such a message. Would you obey it? If it warned you not to take a flight, would you cancel? If it urged you to call someone you hadn't spoken to in years, would you dial? Each choice reshapes your reality, but the message itself insists that your response has already been made. Free will collapses into the choreography of inevitability. You are not choosing. You are fulfilling. And yet, hidden within this paradox is another layer. What if the message is vague, interpretable? Human minds will bend meaning to fit outcomes. A warning about danger could apply to 1,000 small accidents. A promise of fortune could mean anything from money to love. In this way, the signal from tomorrow may be less about time travel and more about perception. Perhaps our brains are already wired to generate such signals. Hunches, intuitions, déjà vu, echoes of futures that collapse into memory as though they had always been true. The unsettling part is how seamlessly our minds rewrite the story. Once an event happens, we look back at the signal and declare it inevitable. We convince ourselves we saw the pattern all along. The message was right not because it came from the future, but because the future bent our perception to accept it. In this sense, prophecy and self-fulfillment are indistinguishable. The signal from tomorrow leaves us with haunting questions. If the future can speak, does it change, or does it merely announce? If the message guides you, is it guidance or the illusion of choice? And if every signal already belongs to a closed loop, then perhaps the universe itself is the message, forever sending itself reminders, forever whispering from tomorrow back into the ear of today. Crystallized moment suspension. Imagine this. The world around you halts, not in silence, not in stillness, but in a strange suspension where a single instant elongates beyond measure. A bird caught mid-flight hovers above you, wings half spread, never completing its arc. A droplet of rain glitters in the air, a perfect jewel, never falling, yet never quite still. Your heart rests between two beats, stretched thin across a span of centuries, and yet, within this fracture of time, you can still think, still move, still feel. This is the paradox of crystallized moment suspension. A single instant, drawn out like glass being pulled, transformed into eternity. To live inside such a moment would be to enter an impossible contradiction. On one level, nothing advances. The arrow of time does not fly forward. The clock hands never move. The sun remains nailed to the same position in the sky. And yet, your consciousness continues to unfold. You experience depth inside an instant, as though reality has given you infinite room to wander within a frame that should have been no wider than a blink. Imagine standing before a door, hand raised to knock, and realizing you could spend lifetimes in the gap between fist and wood. Empires could rise and fall, galaxies could swirl and vanish, all within the breath you have not yet released. Physics whispers that such a phenomenon might not be entirely impossible. In relativity, as you approach the speed of light, time dilates. A traveler moving at extreme velocity might experience only seconds while centuries pass outside. Near the event horizon of a black hole, time stretches from the perspective of a distant observer, freezing an object at the edge forever, even though from within the fall continues. What if consciousness could slip into that dilation, into the razor-thin sliver of a moment, and expand it from the inside out? To those outside, nothing happens. To you, eternity unfolds. The implications are staggering. In this frozen instant, choice itself becomes strange. If time does not advance, can you make a decision? Or is the decision already crystallized, suspended like the moment itself? Perhaps the very act of choosing exists only because time moves, and without forward flow, you are not a decision maker, but a witness. Yet, within the suspension, it would feel real. You could craft entire worlds of imagination, trace the structures of memory, even build civilizations of thought, all while your hand still hovers inches from the door. There are echoes of this in human experience. Artists speak of flow states, where hours vanish into a single breath of creation. Lovers describe moments so intense they feel endless, as if time itself bent to preserve them. Trauma survivors sometimes recall a car crash or accident, where every detail slowed, glass shattering in the air, metal folding in slow motion, as though the mind, desperate to process, expanded the instant. Could it be that our consciousness already has a hint of this ability, that eternity lives in every second, waiting only for the right fracture to reveal itself? But there is a darker undertone. If trapped inside a crystallized moment, what if you could never leave? What if the world outside is gone, unreachable, because you are suspended in a single point of time? To you, it may feel like infinite life, but to everything else, you are frozen, a statue, a ghost locked between frames of reality. It would be both immortality and exile. The universe would continue on without you, while you inhabit a forever that no one else can touch. And then comes the question that haunts: is this already happening? Could it be that our perception of flowing time is itself an illusion, stitched together from crystallized instants, each infinite in depth, but strung like beads to form the illusion of continuity? Perhaps we are already living in frozen eternities, slipping from one to the next, never aware of the gap between. What we call time may be nothing more than the fragile thread weaving these crystallized infinities into a tapestry the mind can endure. So, next time you feel a moment stretch, a heartbeat that seems longer than it should, a second that feels unreasonably heavy, pause. Consider that you may be glimpsing the true architecture of existence, not a flowing river of time, but a hall of crystal chambers, each one a single instant, each one capable of holding eternity. And you, a traveler, suspended inside them, moving not through time, but through an endless sequence of frozen eternities. Observation loop. Feedback. There is a danger hidden in the act of looking forward. To observe the future is not a passive act. It is a disruption, a ripple, a hand brushing against the glass of time. The moment you glimpse what lies ahead, you alter it, however subtly. And because it changes, the vision you saw is no longer accurate, but the new version is itself observed, and so it shifts again and again, endlessly. This is the observation loop feedback, a paradox in which every attempt to see tomorrow bends it, and every bend requires a new observation, until reality becomes an unstable echo chamber of possible outcomes. Imagine staring at a pool of water. You lean close to see your reflection, but your breath disturbs the surface. The ripples distort your face, and the more intently you stare, the more your presence ruins the image. Now replace water with time. You gaze into the next hour, the next day, the next century, and in the very act of looking, you disturb what would have been. The future is no longer what it was. The act of observation has woven itself into the fabric of the outcome. Quantum mechanics already hints at this uncanny principle. In the double-slit experiment, particles behave differently simply because they are observed. Their future trajectory is altered by the act of measurement. If matter itself shifts under a gaze, why not time? Why not fate? Observation is not neutral. It is an intervention. The observation loop. Feedback simply extends this truth across scales. Each attempt to see tomorrow bends tomorrow, and each bend calls for another observation, which bends it again. Consider prophecy in this light. Someone is told they will rise to power. Hearing it, they change their behavior, act with greater confidence, attract more followers, and thus fulfill the prophecy. But that fulfillment was not the one first observed. It was the product of the prophecy itself, which then becomes its own observation loop, cycling until the outcome is not prediction, but recursion. The seer does not describe the future. They create it, warp it, destabilize it, forever chasing a reflection they can never hold still. And what does this mean for us? Every time you try to predict your own life, telling yourself you will fail or succeed or lose or endure, you begin to build that reality. Your self-predictions are observations that bend outcomes. A student convinced they will fail an exam studies differently, sits differently, perhaps panics, and their failure becomes more likely. A worker who just knows they will be overlooked for promotion might shrink from opportunities, fulfilling the very vision they dreaded. The loop is not mystical, it is woven into human behavior, a feedback system where observation is indistinguishable from creation. But the terrifying possibility is that this scales upward into reality itself. What if history is not a fixed chain of cause and effect, but a feedback loop, shifting under the weight of its own observation? What if every attempt to measure, predict, or control the future destabilizes it further? Wars justified by inevitable conflict erupt because leaders observed inevitability. Economies collapse because people believe collapse is coming. Futures become unstable because we keep trying to look at them. Some mystics have long warned of this. The Mayan concept of time as cyclical implied that prophecy itself keeps the cycle turning, each observation ensuring its own renewal. In certain indigenous traditions, visions of the future are seen as warnings not to fix fate, but to release it, lest the act of clinging to the vision create the very disaster it foretold. Even modern science fiction obsesses over this loop, from time travelers who try to prevent disaster only to cause it, to oracles whose accuracy is indistinguishable from influence. The horror of the observation loop. Feedback is its lack of escape. If seeing the future changes it, then there can never be a final, stable vision. Every glimpse fractures reality further, creating new branches, new uncertainties, each folding back into itself. It is like chasing a horizon that runs faster every time you approach. You cannot win. The act of looking ensures the instability continues forever. And maybe this is already happening in your life, in small ways. That moment when you thought, this relationship is doomed, and your fear quietly shaped its end. That instant when you told yourself, I will fail, and your dread guided you toward the failure you expected. Each was an observation feeding back into reality, looping until the outcome became indistinguishable from the prediction. So what does one do in the face of such a trap? Perhaps the answer is not to stop observing the future, but to observe differently. To look not with fear, but with intent. Because if observation bends reality, then to imagine hope is also to bend it. To envision strength is to loop yourself toward it. The loop cannot be broken, but it can be shaped. Still, in the darkest corner of thought lingers a more unsettling question. If observation destabilizes reality, then what happens when the future observes us? What if time itself looks back, adjusting the present as we gaze forward? Perhaps every déjà vu, every flicker of impossible familiarity, is the feedback echo of timelines correcting themselves under mutual observation. Not you watching the future, not the future watching you, but both locked together in a hall of mirrors, endlessly looping, endlessly reshaping, until no one can say which vision was true. Triggerless event occurrence. Imagine a spark leaping into the darkness, not from a fire, not from friction, not from anything at all, just appearing, raw, inexplicable, suspended in being without ever being born. That is the essence of the triggerless event occurrence, something that happens without any cause, standing outside the chain of time like an orphaned moment, untethered to anything before it. We are taught from the beginning that everything requires a reason. Every sound has a source, every shadow a body, every action a cause. The human mind depends on this order. It builds comfort from chains of explanation. A tree falls because the wind shook it. A war erupts because tensions boiled over. A memory forms because you lived through an experience. But what if one day something occurred without origin? No spark before the flame, no whisper before the thunder. Just the event itself, demanding reality without debt to causality. You may have brushed against this possibility already, in fleeting ways. A thought that enters your mind without trigger, so alien it feels like it didn't belong to you. A burst of emotion, fear, grief, elation, that arrives without reason, like weather from a sky that was clear. Or a coincidence so precise it seems orchestrated, yet no pattern of cause can explain it. These moments disturb because they resist the story we need to tell ourselves, that everything follows from something. A triggerless event is a story with no first chapter. Philosophers have long been haunted by this paradox. Aristotle named the unmoved mover, a first cause that set everything in motion without itself being caused. In theology, some claim God created the universe ex nihilo, from nothing without precedent. In quantum physics, particles sometimes flicker into existence from the vacuum itself, without apparent cause, their appearance not predictable but probabilistic. The triggerless event is not just an abstract nightmare, it lurks in the foundations of how we try to explain reality. But when you apply this to lived experience, the unease deepens. Imagine history itself containing events without origins, a war that begins without a spark, armies suddenly mobilized with no first strike, a technology appearing without invention, no prototypes, no process, just suddenly there, as if it had always been waiting, a person entering your life with no backstory, no past, yet undeniably real. How do you make sense of consequences when there is no beginning? The most terrifying form of this paradox lives in identity. What if a thought or an action of yours one day had no cause? Not habit, not upbringing, not memory, not biology, just a raw eruption of will with no foundation. Would it still be you who acted, or would you dissolve into something alien, a puppet to a spark that had no flame? We want to believe our choices come from somewhere, even if we don't fully understand them. But the triggerless event strips that safety away, leaving only the unsettling truth of causeless becoming. The world is stitched together by causality. It is the net that keeps chaos from swallowing meaning. To imagine even one thread cut is to risk unraveling the whole. If one event can occur without cause, why not all? If the chain of time can break once, how do you know it isn't broken everywhere, at every moment, and you are only pretending to see links where none exist? Perhaps the logic of causes and effects is not the skeleton of reality, but a fragile illusion, a mask we wear to keep from seeing the raw, causeless sparks beneath. And yet, there is a strange liberation hidden in the terror, because if events can occur without causes, then nothing is fully bound. Determinism weakens. The world need not only be a machine grinding forward on the teeth of prior events. In the cracks of causality, in the gaps where no reason exists, there lies possibility. Freedom, mystery. The very strangeness of the triggerless event may be what allows existence to be more than machinery, more than inevitability. Still, the mind recoils. To accept causelessness is to accept groundlessness. It is to admit that reality might contain sparks that ignite themselves, shadows that cast themselves, beginnings without origin. The triggerless event occurrence confronts us with the possibility that explanation has limits, that some moments exist not to be understood, but simply to exist, and that we, fragile creatures addicted to reasons, may have to live with sparks we can neither trace nor extinguish. So, the next time something happens in your life without reason, when an emotion surges unprovoked, when a coincidence stuns you into silence, when a thought arrives from nowhere, pause. It may not be madness, it may not be accident. It may be the whisper of a deeper truth, that reality sometimes breathes on its own, without trigger, without flame, without cause. A spark that owes nothing to anything, but still burns all the same. Temporal immunity barrier. There are stories about time travel that make it sound like a puzzle you can outwit. Change one choice and the future bends. Save one life and 1,000 others ripple outward. But buried inside every legend, every paradox, every experiment whispered about in secret is a darker truth. Some events cannot be touched. No matter how far back you travel, no matter how carefully you interfere, they remain. These are the untouchables, the fixed points, the stones buried so deep in the river of time that the current splits and rushes around them, refusing to move them even an inch. This is the paradox of the temporal immunity barrier. You hear of it in myth first. The ancient king who tried to prevent a prophecy only to become its instrument, the seer who warned that no force could stop the fire, and every attempt to smother it only fed the flames. These are not just stories of fate, they are hints of immunity. Certain events are so tightly woven into the fabric of reality that they resist any attempt at unraveling. Imagine standing in such a moment. You know with certainty what is about to unfold, because you have seen it once already. You step in, change your words, pull someone aside, block a doorway, shout a warning. And for a heartbeat, it seems you've succeeded. But then time shudders, as if correcting itself, and the event swerves back into alignment. Perhaps it unfolds differently. Smaller details altered, but the core remains. The person still dies. The war still ignites. the betrayal still cuts. It is not that your interference had no effect. It is that the barrier absorbed it, redirecting every change into the same inevitable outcome. A friend once told me of a dream so vivid he swore it was more than fantasy. In the dream, he was sent back to stop an accident, his brother falling from a cliff. He reached him in time, grabbed his arm, pulled him back to safety. Relief washed over him. But then, in the dream, a rockslide broke loose above, crushing his brother instantly. He woke shaken, realizing the dream was not about saving someone, but about learning the horror of inevitability. He said it felt as though the universe itself had declared, "This moment cannot be rewritten." Some physicists, those who dare to whisper about such things, say this barrier is structural. Time, like a building, requires load-bearing beams. Remove one, and the whole structure collapses. So reality defends its architecture. The death of a certain leader, the outbreak of a certain war, the invention of a certain tool, these are beams. They cannot be touched, not because they are holy, but because they are necessary. Time guards them with a force stronger than paradox, inevitability. Others believe the barrier is more personal, that each of us carries moments immune to alteration, events so defining that they are stitched directly into our souls. A heartbreak, a loss, a choice. Try to change them, and you will find yourself circling back again and again, the outcome unchanged, because that scar is the very thing shaping who you are. Without it, you would not exist as you do. And yet, there is terror in this. Because if some events are immune, then time travel itself is not freedom. It is a trap disguised as possibility. You can wander across centuries, you can rearrange the scenery of lives, but when you touch the pillars of reality, your hands pass through as if against glass. Worse still, sometimes your interference becomes the mechanism that preserves the event, making you complicit in the very thing you tried to undo. Think of it. A traveler tries to stop an assassination. Their actions alert the assassin, forcing the strike to happen faster. They try to prevent a discovery, only to provide the spark that inspires it. This is the cruelty of the barrier. It does not simply block you. It bends you into the tool of its preservation. The event resists you by absorbing you, and yet, within the cruelty lies a strange grace. For if some events are immune, then perhaps they are not accidents. Perhaps they are anchors, fixed not to punish, but to steady. Without them, maybe time would unravel entirely. Without them, maybe reality itself could not bear its own weight. In this sense, the barrier is not the enemy of free will, but its boundary, the wall against which freedom presses, shaping itself. So, the next time you look back and wish you could change everything, erase a loss, undo a mistake, prevent a heartbreak, remember the possibility of the barrier. It may be that those moments were never yours to change. It may be that they are not flaws in your story, but the keystones holding the rest of it together. The temporal immunity barrier is not merciful, nor is it cruel. It simply is. The stones in the river, immovable, against which all currents bend. You can rage against them, you can dream of shattering them, but you cannot. What you can do is learn to navigate the waters they shape, to understand that your freedom exists, not in denying inevitability, but in deciding who you will be when you stand inside it. And maybe that is the lesson. Not that everything is mutable, but that meaning is born in what cannot be moved. For what remains untouched is what defines us. And in the end, perhaps the universe guards these moments, because without them, we would never know who we truly are. Falling through past futures. Imagine time not as a line, but as a cathedral of drafts, layers of tomorrow stacked atop each yesterday. When you travel, you don't simply move across dates. You fall through sedimentary rings of unlived tomorrows. These are the past futures. Worlds people once believed were coming, worlds that gathered plans and blueprints and prayers, and then never arrived. As you descend, they appear like translucent cities suspended in the air. There's the 1900s future of zeppelins drifting between brass towers, streets swept by pneumatic tubes, everyone in tailored coats. A level below it, the 1950s dream of atomic suburbia, chrome kitchens, pocket reactors, backyard fallout shelters arranged like picket fences. Lower still, the 1969 future where moon colonies became weekend destinations, and Mars had a zip code. Then, the 1999 world that expected midnight to break civilization's computers and throw sparks across the sky. Each layer is a possibility that once felt inevitable, so tangible that people built careers, policies, and families around them, then collapsed into dust the moment a different tomorrow stepped in. When you time travel, you cut through those layers at speed. The air grows crowded with discontinued advertisements for companies that never existed, broadcast schedules for shows that never aired, billboards for elections that never happened. Train lines on maps branch into phantom routes that had funding, surveys, environmental impact statements, everything but the year that would have made them real. People move with the serene confidence of a story they think they know the ending to. They don't. You do. That's the ache of it. Each past future has its texture. Some are buoyant, utopias slick with optimism, where progress is a straight escalator. Others are heavy with dread. Ecological timelines where the oceans have already climbed the stairs. Surveillance futures where everyone smiles because they're watched. Economic forecasts that never anticipated the kindness of a stranger or the cruelty of a single law. You feel the pressure of their expectations like weather. Step wrong, and the wind of what they thought was coming shoves you sideways. There's a rule experienced travelers whisper: do not anchor to a draft. If you fall in love with a past future, if you carry its artifacts home like charms, you risk dragging it into the present. Cities will begin to tilt toward it. Policies will find language that seems oddly familiar. You will mistake nostalgia for inevitability and call it destiny. This is how an extinguished future revives, not by force, but by preference. The past was full of roads that could have been. The present still listens when you hum their old songs. And yet, the lesson here is not cynicism. The past futures teach humility. They show how wrong certainty can be, how human beings are best at forecasting everything except the people they'll become. They reveal that history is not a march, but a braid. Some strands bright, some dark, many cut. Every now is a survivor of 1,000 unfollowed arrows painted on the floor. When you walk your city's streets, you already live inside the footprint of abandoned tomorrows. The empty lot that was once a hospital proposal, the highway that didn't get built, the school that might have stood where a mall now hums. You don't need a time machine to feel them. You just need to listen for the hollow places where intention never turned into brick. Philosophically, falling through past futures reframes causality. The past is not a fixed ledger, but a library of trajectories, each with its own imagined end. We inherit those imaginaries. Our technology, art, and fears are colored by futures that didn't happen. The phone in your pocket carries the ghost of devices that failed. Your city grid remembers canceled rails. Your language is haunted by promises that expired. Identity is shaped by these absences too. The career you didn't choose was once a vivid prophecy. The person you didn't become used to have your name. Here's the paradox that nicks the heart. When you witness a past future closely enough, you change. That change alters what you build when you return. And what you build becomes someone else's past future, the layer another traveler will fall through and ache for. In this sense, time isn't linear. It's editorial. Drafts pile on drafts, marginalia in the margins of the world. We are all red pens. So if you do fall, pass gently. Read the drafts with care. Learn their grammar of hope and their punctuation of fear. Then surface carrying not their certainty, but their caution, that the next future we write will one day become someone's abandoned blueprint or beloved ruin. Let that knowledge make you precise and kind, because every choice we make inks a sentence into a manuscript we cannot finish, only revise. Weather of time shifts. Imagine if time were not a steady river, but a sky, sometimes bright and calm, sometimes storming with chaos, always shifting without warning. We expect the hours to flow evenly, each minute following the next with quiet obedience. Yet what if time behaved like weather? What if some days were soaked in centuries, and others evaporated into moments so thin you could barely hold them? One instant might be heavy and humid, dragging itself across your senses like a thundercloud. Another might pass like a gust of wind, swift, sharp, gone before you even know it brushed against you. This is the unsettling idea of time as weather. Unpredictable, unstable, and never under our control. You've felt this already. Think of the way a joyful day with someone you love dissolves too quickly, vanishing like sunlight swallowed by clouds. Hours slip away unnoticed, stolen by laughter. Then recall the heavy minutes of waiting in a hospital, or the agonizing seconds in a car crash, each heartbeat stretching, thickening, refusing to move. Our inner perception of time is already stormy. It refuses to obey the clock. It stretches, contracts, swirls, sometimes crushing us, sometimes releasing us. We live in a weather system of hours, an atmosphere of seconds that shift like storms across the sky of our lives. Physics, too, suggests time may not be as stable as we believe. Near black holes, it slows to a crawl for anyone caught in their gravity, while far away, it flows freely. To an astronaut near the event horizon, minutes might pass. To us, eons would have slipped by. This is temporal weather written into the fabric of space-time, currents and winds of duration shaped by mass and velocity. Even here on Earth, satellites must account for these distortions. GPS signals drift because time is slightly different up there than it is down here. We live beneath a sky of temporal clouds, barely noticing the storms overhead. But what if the weather of time is not just a physical phenomenon, but a hidden rule of reality itself? What if time has moods, like the seasons, shifting from gentle summers to violent tempests? Perhaps whole eras of human history are caught in long temporal reigns, where centuries drag in misery, while other eras are flashes of lightning, bursts of progress and collapse compressed into moments. Think of the Middle Ages, stretching slowly across centuries of plagues and wars. Then compare it to the explosion of knowledge and technology in the last 100 years, racing ahead like a tornado. Civilizations, too, may live beneath these skies. Their rise and fall shaped not only by chance or will, but by the weather of time itself. The most haunting question is whether these shifts can turn against us personally. Could you find yourself inside a storm of hours, where time accelerates uncontrollably, dragging you to old age in the span of what feels like a season? Or the opposite? Could you step into a fog where time thickens, holding you hostage in a moment, while the rest of the world storms ahead without you? For someone inside, it might feel like forever. For others outside, you would vanish in an instant. Time weather would be the most dangerous storm, because you cannot shield yourself from it. You can only endure it, the way a ship endures the sea. And perhaps déjà vu, lost hours, sudden distortions in memory, perhaps these are not accidents of the mind, but small gusts of temporal weather brushing against us. A glitch in the system, like a swirl of wind that passes unnoticed, but still leaves its trace. When you feel a second repeat itself, when you sense the day has already unfolded once before, you may be brushing against a turbulence in the atmosphere of time. We are not immune. We are the weather's passengers. So the next time you sit in silence and feel a second linger too long, or find a whole evening vanished before you could hold it, think of the sky. Think of clouds drifting, storms forming, winds howling without pattern. We are all under the same temporal atmosphere, sometimes calm, sometimes violent. Sometimes merciful, sometimes cruel. Time does not always tick like a machine. It swirls, it breaks, it gathers. It is weather, and we are only ever standing beneath its shifting skies.